Chapter 500. Inside the room, Yang Kai sat calmly in his chair. Ying Ju and the old demon also returned to the room and stood behind him while the mysterious woman stood about 15 meters in front of Yang Kai. After suffering a few losses, she had become quite obedient. She knew that as long as that little figure made of hair was in Yang Kai's hand, she wouldn't be able to escape his grasp no matter what. Her two jade-like hands intertwined with each other, showing the nervousness in her heart. Lowering her head slightly, she seemed to be docile and submissive, but the pair of beautiful eyes hidden under her bangs were constantly observing Kai Yang's movements, waiting for the moment he would reveal a flaw. From time to time, her red lips would squirm a few times, as if she was cursing him. "Your existence makes me very wary," Yang Kai said frankly. "You seem to have some special abilities. For someone like you, if you can't be used by me, I will immediately destroy you." "Really?" The woman raised her head and glanced at Yang Kai somewhat timidly, only to find that his expression was extremely serious. Obviously, he wasn't trying to scare her, causing her heart to tremble slightly. This was the first time she had seen such a ruthless man, one who didn't seem to mind being ruthless at all. "Yes." Yang Kai nodded lightly. "So, whatever I ask, you answer. If there is anything that displeases me, you understand." The woman rubbed her red forehead and nodded gently. Under such absolute strength, she didn't dare to resist. "What's your name?" "Shui Ling." The woman pursed her lips and replied somewhat reluctantly. "Shui Ling?" Yang Kai frowned. This was a name that was very much in line with the abilities she displayed, but in Yang Kai's memory, there was no such person. Even this surname was quite strange. "Where are you from?" "Water Spirit Temple." Yang Kai's brow furrowed even more as he tried to think of the names of the forces he knew, but none of them had anything to do with Water Spirit Temple. It was even the first time he had heard of the name of this faction. The old demon, who was standing behind him, suddenly had a strange look on his face when he heard the words Water God Temple. There was a thoughtful look in his eyes, and there was also a trace of suspicion, as if some chaotic memories in his mind had been triggered. A moment later, he slowly shook his head. Due to his severe memory loss, the words Water Spirit Temple sounded familiar to him, but when he tried to think about it, he couldn't remember anything. "There's no need to think about it, you don't know anything about Water Spirit Temple." Shui Ling saw that Yang Kai was deep in thought and chuckled lightly, a hint of contempt in her voice. He seemed to be mocking Yang Kai for being an ignorant country bumpkin. "But I know that you didn't just randomly fabricate a faction to fool me." Yang Kai coldly snorted at the other party's arrogant gaze. This made him a little uncomfortable. Although she was clearly a prisoner, Shui Ling didn't feel the slightest bit of nervousness, just like a junior from a superforce being captured by a second or third-class force. It was as if she had nothing to fear. "I didn't, you're just a frog at the bottom of a well." Shui Ling slowly shook her head, her light blue hair swaying gracefully in the wind. "Water Spirit Temple, it is indeed a faction, you don't need to pursue this matter. The time has come. I'll tell you." Just as Yang Kai was feeling a little impatient, Meng Wu Ya's voice reached his ears. "I understand." Yang Kai didn't ask any more questions, thinking that this Water Spirit Temple was just a secluded force. But since this little girl is from Water Spirit Temple, you have to be careful when dealing with her, otherwise it is very likely that she will bring a devastating disaster to your Yang family. Yang Kai's expression changed slightly. The Yang family was already the strongest force in the central capital, and even in the entire world, it was second to none. But listening to Meng Wu Ya's words, it seemed that this Water Spirit Temple's strength was even greater than the Yang family's. How was this possible? How could a secluded force have such great ability? His expression changing slightly, Yang Kai continued to ask, "Age?" Shui Ling curled her lips, biting her lower lip lightly as she whispered, "Can I not say this?" Yang Kai firmly shook his head. 19 years old. Shui Ling's face was filled with displeasure. For a woman, age was a taboo, especially when being questioned by a man. Yang Kai took a deep breath, suddenly feeling as if he was in a dream. He could judge that Shui Ling's answer just now was the truth. In other words, she was really only 19 years old. Moreover, this was in line with her temperament and tone of voice. However, A 19-year-old immortal ascension boundary 8th stage cultivator was simply unbelievable. Such aptitude and talent had already surpassed all the young talents Yang Kai knew of. In front of her, Liu Qingyao and the others didn't even have the qualifications to carry her shoes. In an instant, Yang Kai's evaluation of Water Spirit Temple rose to a new height. This secluded force was able to cultivate a genius like Shui Ling, saying that it was superior to the Yang family was not nonsense. Although his heart was filled with shock, he didn't show it on his face, still remaining indifferent. Perceiving this, Shui Ling actually felt a little disappointed. She had been expecting to see Yang Kai's shocked and depressed expression. "How old are you then?" Shui Ling asked curiously. "Almost 18, Yang Kai replied, his attitude still quite amiable. "Really?" Shui Ling was surprised. "Your way of doing things doesn't seem to be the same." After a pause, she continued, "But your aptitude is quite sloppy." Her evaluation was quite natural, without the slightest awareness of her status as a prisoner. Her expression was quite natural, as if she felt she was qualified to make such an evaluation. The corner of Yang Kai's mouth rose as he chuckled lightly. "Your Water Spirit Temple must have many young people like me who possess great strength, right?" Shui Ling sneered. "Let's put it this way, if you were to enter our Water Spirit Temple, among the younger generation, your aptitude would probably rank in the top 100. What about you?" Yang Kai showed a look of interest. Shui Ling suddenly smiled proudly, raising 3 white fingers. "Top 3. "Oh, I see." Yang Kai nodded slightly. "If I have time, I will definitely pay a visit to your Water Spirit Temple and exchange pointers with some of your younger generation's masters." Shui Ling smiled contemptuously. "You think you can do that? I'm afraid you don't have the qualifications. When I say you're good, I mean you're good here, but where we are, you're not good enough." "What do you mean by here and there?" Yang Kai frowned. "Me." Shui Ling raised her head proudly, disdainfully glaring at Yang Kai. "I know you're trying to trick me, so what? But that's the truth, don't you feel quite shocked?" Yang Kai stared back at her with a smile, his eyes seemingly burning with fighting spirit, calmly saying, "I will definitely go to Water Spirit Temple." Shui Ling's arrogance gradually converged as she stared at Yang Kai like she was looking at a fool. She really couldn't understand why this man could still be so excited after hearing those words. What kind of person is he? I still have a few questions. Yang Kai didn't pursue the previous topic. This woman was still young, so it was pointless to argue with her. "After I finish asking, can I leave?" Shui Ling's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do as you wish." Yang Kai smiled. "Then hurry up and ask." Shui Ling's expression became excited, her eyes filled with expectation, as if she couldn't wait to sprout wings and fly out of here. "You said you came here to find someone. Who are you looking for?" Yang Kai's expression became serious as he asked. "I don't know." Shui Ling shook her head. "She's wearing a veil, so I don't know what she looks like. Why are you looking for her?" Yang Kai's eyes narrowed. Shui Ling suddenly felt as if she was being stared at by a poisonous snake, as if she said the wrong thing, she would be mercilessly killed. Shui Ling's heart couldn't help trembling as she stared at Yang Kai in amazement, not understanding why his aura had suddenly changed. After a moment of silence, she cautiously replied, "Her physique is very strange and her aptitude is even better than yours. I want to pull her into my Water Spirit Temple." Yang Kai suddenly stood up, his yuan qi fluctuating. Shui Ling was startled and quickly retreated a few steps, assuming a defensive posture as she asked in a trembling voice, "What are you doing? How do you know her physique is strange?" Yang Kai approached Shui Ling step by step, his tyrannical spiritual energy enveloping the space around her. The person Shui Ling was looking for was undoubtedly Xia Ningqiang. This explained why she had snuck into the pill room. However, she was able to see through Xia Ningqiang's special physique, which made Yang Kai feel slightly uneasy. Xia Ningqiang's physique was indeed not ordinary. It was the sacred spirit medicine body, a physique that was born for alchemy, a physique that could allow one to reach the peak of alchemy. Meng Wu Ya had always been protecting Xia Ningqiang, not letting her be coveted by others. However, if the news of Xia Ningqiang having the sacred spirit medicine body were to spread out, even Meng Wu Ya would not be able to protect his little senior sister. At that time, No matter whose hands his little senior sister fell into, Yang Kai wouldn't want to see the result. Yang Kai had no choice but to take precautions. If there was no other way, he didn't mind killing her here to silence her. I just know. Shui Ling screamed, seeing the murderous intent in Yang Kai's eyes, her heart filled with fear as she retreated again and again. How do you know? Yang Kai continued to interrogate her, not giving her any time to breathe. How am I supposed to know? When she entered the city that day, I saw her and immediately knew, it may be related to my special physique. Yang Kai's footsteps came to a stop less than half a foot away from Shui Ling, staring at her from top to bottom. Shui Ling couldn't help feeling a chill run down her spine, as if under this gaze, she had been stripped naked and presented in front of this young man. You also have a special physique. Yang Kai was surprised. Shui Ling nodded gently as she gasped for breath, her full breasts heaving up and down. She suddenly discovered that this young man who was even younger than her gave off a strong sense of oppression, so strong that even an elite from Water Spirit Temple like her couldn't withstand it. At such a close distance, she could easily launch an attack with her strength that surpassed his by nearly an entire great realm, but Shui Ling didn't dare. She had a feeling that even without that little person restraining her, this young man was not someone she could kill. Chapter 501. Restless thoughts flashed through Shui Ling's mind several times, but she still couldn't condense her yuan qi. What kind of special constitution do you have? Yang Kai tilted his head and looked at her. Listening to her words, Yang Kai immediately realized that this woman in front of him also had a special constitution. A special constitution, Yang Kai had only ever seen his little senior sister. This kind of special constitution was a blessing from the heavens and was extremely rare. Moreover, each special constitution played a different role, so it was rare for two people with the same special constitution to appear. His little senior sister's special constitution was particularly suited for alchemy, so now that another person with a special constitution had appeared in front of him, Yang Kai was naturally very interested and wanted to know some details. Shui Ling looked at Yang Kai vigilantly, somewhat unwilling to answer. Just as Xia Ning Chang's sacred spirit medicine body was strictly kept a secret, Shui Ling's special constitution was also something she wanted to hide. But now that she was under someone else's roof, she had no choice but to lower her head. After hesitating for a long time, Shui Ling finally said, "Water spirit body." Yang Kai nodded slightly, knowing that this woman wasn't lying to him. From the way this woman had acted so many times, her special constitution should be related to water. Moreover, her name should also be derived from this. Is there anything special about it? Yang Kai asked in a pleasant tone. I can transform my body into a flowing stream of water. Shui Ling said, activating her yuan qi to demonstrate. Yang Kai didn't show any signs of guarding against her. Under the watchful gazes of the several pairs of eyes in the room, this petite woman with long light blue hair really became as transparent as water, leaving behind only a humanoid outline. Gradually, she even transformed into a round ball of water. Even Ying Ju, who had always been calm and collected, couldn't help gaping, his face filled with disbelief. That's more than that, right? Yang Kai smiled and reached out to touch the ball of water in front of him. Peng the ball of water suddenly burst, scattering a mist. Shui Ling's body suddenly appeared not far from Yang Kai's side, her face flushed red as she crossed her arms. Clutching his chest, he gritted his teeth and glared at them. He seemed to be trembling with anger. Yang Kai was stunned. Twisting his fingers, he raised his eyebrows and said, "Touched where you shouldn't have touched. What do you think?" Shui Ling gasped for breath, grinding her teeth so hard they creaked. "I didn't do it on purpose, and I didn't feel anything." Yang Kai's expression remained calm. Just now, he had only felt as if he had touched a stream of water, not a human body, but for Shui Ling, he was certain this wasn't the case, otherwise, she wouldn't have been so indignant and angry. "I'll remember you," Shui Ling said, her eyes filled with hatred. "There are many people who remember me." Yang Kai slowly shook his head. He didn't care. But those people didn't end well. "I'm very curious about the abilities of your water spirit body." Seeing his indifferent expression, she casually brushed aside the matter of the molestation just now. Shui Ling couldn't help feeling a sense of powerlessness. She had never seen such a shameless man before. It was as if he had spent all of his cultivation training on his face. I'm not in the mood to talk about it. Shui Ling coldly snorted, if you want to kill me, do as you see fit. Yang Kai scratched his forehead, knowing that his unintentional actions just now had truly angered this woman, so he didn't force her any further. He was afraid of this mysterious woman only because he didn't know her intentions before. He also didn't know her background. Now that he knew, he didn't care much. As long as she wasn't a subordinate of one of his brothers, as long as she wasn't trying to harm Xia Ningqiang, Yang Kai wouldn't care about her. Is there anything else you want to ask? If there's nothing else, I'll be leaving now. Yang Kai shook his head. Shui Ling's expression froze for a moment, not having expected him to be so easy to deal with, immediately stretching out her hand and saying, give me back my hair. That's impossible. Yang Kai chuckled, you can go, I won't stop you, but this thing must remain in my hands because I don't know if what you said just now is true or false. I also don't know if you'll come here to stir up trouble in the future. How can you be like this? Shui Ling was depressed. With that thing in your hands, I won't be able to escape from your control for the rest of my life. Yet you still dare to say you'll let me go? Where can I go? Do what you want, as long as you don't come to my house to make trouble. The world is big, you can go wherever you want. After a pause, Yang Kai chuckled, of course, if you're willing to work for me, I'll welcome you. Work for you? Shui Ling sneered, do you think you have the qualifications? If you don't want to, we can cooperate. As long as you're willing to stay, anything can be discussed. Yang Kai continued to persuade her. Only a ghost would want to stay. Shui Ling coldly snorted, turned around, and walked away, secretly raising her Yuan Qi to guard against Yang Kai's blatant lies. But even after she left Yang Kai's house, she didn't hear any movement behind her. Obviously the other party didn't want to embarrass her. Looking back, Shui Ling couldn't help stomping her foot in anger. This time she had really suffered a big loss. Not only had she not been able to escape from that person's control, even her pure and innocent body had been touched by him, but the person herself had said she didn't feel anything. How infuriating. Also, who was the one who made that little doll? Why was it able to connect my essence to it? That damn bastard, sooner or later I'll make him pay. Shui Ling swore to herself. Inside the mansion, Yang Kai stood up and put down the psychological burden he had been worrying about for the past few days. Young master, why didn't you let that woman stay? If she could display her abilities properly, it would have been of great benefit to you. The old demon asked, somewhat puzzled. A forcibly picked melon isn't sweet. Yang Kai shook his head, tossing the little doll in his hand. By relying on this, I do have the ability to forcibly keep her here, but what about after that? If she were to deliberately retaliate and cause trouble in the house, who would be able to suppress her? If we really fought, she definitely wouldn't be old servant's opponent. Even the several blood warriors in the house would be able to defeat her, but her physique is truly a headache. The old demon nodded. The water spirit body was indeed very strange. If it weren't for the strand of hair Yang Kai had cut off at Pojing Lake that day, the old demon wouldn't have been able to do anything to Shui Ling. What's more, as long as I have this, she won't be too far away from me. When I want to use her in the future, what need do I have to worry about her not yielding? Yang Kai smiled. Young master is wise. The old demon felt a chill run down his spine as he couldn't help worrying about Shui Ling. That little girl probably believed Yang Kai's words and thought that from now on, she and Yang Kai wouldn't interfere with each other's business. Little did she know that Yang Kai only saw her as a hired thug. 19 years old, Immortal Ascension Boundary 8th Stage. Yang Kai murmured, taking a deep breath as a look of yearning flashed across his eyes. What kind of great force was this water spirit temple? It was actually able to cultivate such a genius, and Shui Ling had also said that she was only ranked 3rd in Water Spirit Temple. This meant that there were at least 2 other existences in Water Spirit Temple who were on the same level as Shui Ling, perhaps even stronger. Such a great force actually exists in this world. Yang Kai couldn't help feeling an urge to see for himself. Treasurer Meng. After pondering for a long time, Yang Kai suddenly called out. Meng Wu Ya's voice immediately reached his ear. Don't ask anything. When the time comes, This old master will naturally tell you. For now, you should focus on breaking through to the immortal ascension boundary. Good. Yang Kai sighed. That night's confrontation with Shui Ling, besides Meng Wu Ya, the old demon, and Ying Ju, no one else in the house knew about it. Perhaps a few powerful blood warriors had investigated the situation, but without Yang Kai's orders, none of them dared to approach, so naturally they didn't know the details. That night, Yang Kai announced that he was going into retreat to prepare for his breakthrough to the immortal ascension boundary while Qiu Yimeng took over all the affairs of the house. The current situation in the inheritance war was complicated and confusing. Yang Kai only had 2 blood warriors at his disposal. Although he had a great advantage in terms of financial and material resources, Yang Kai's forces were far superior to Yang Kai's in terms of manpower. Acting rashly would only give the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of, so in the short term, Yang Kai didn't intend to fight with Yang Zhao, only ordering Qiu Yimeng to take some people to harass him. Although eldest brother Yang Wei's strength wasn't weak, in comparison, he was undoubtedly the weakest of the 3 remaining brothers and had long been excluded from the list of possible winners of the inheritance war. All eyes were now focused on Yang Kai and Yang Zhao. The next patriarch of the Yang family was bound to be one of these 2. However, for Yang Kai and Yang Zhao, neither of them was willing to attack Yang Wei, even if they already had the strength and heritage to do so. Firstly, attacking Yang Wei would definitely cost them a lot and weaken their own strength. Secondly, after defeating Yang Wei, the 2 blood warriors around Yang Wei would no longer be able to help in the inheritance war. Yang Wei's allies would definitely choose to join the other side to strengthen the enemy's strength. Perhaps this would be enough to reverse the situation of the inheritance war. It was precisely because of these constraints that although Yang Wei was the weakest, he was also the safest. It was even possible that Yang Zhao and Yang Kai would both suffer heavy losses while Yang Wei would be the fisherman who would reap the benefit. This wasn't something everyone could see clearly. Only those who had a strong sense of the overall situation would be able to see it clearly. Time flew by and soon, 2 months had passed. The entire war city had been silent for 2 months after the last upheaval and the Great Reshuffle. Occasionally, the remaining 3 parties would have some small-scale conflicts, but they were all quite restrained so there weren't too many casualties. More often than not, the cultivators from these forces who participated in the inheritance war were working hard to cultivate and strengthen themselves. After more than 2 months of development, Yang Kai's forces had not changed much, but their overall strength had risen several levels. With mysterious grade pills being taken every day and artifact refiners from Treasure Instrument Sect constantly refining artifacts, it would be ridiculous for their strength to remain stagnant. Every day, a large number of cultivator would break through their bottlenecks and break through to the next level. During this time, many of the leaders of the younger generation had broken through to the immortal ascension boundary. Chapter 502. Today, it was probably, possibly, perhaps. The astral ascension boundary was a threshold for martial artists. Many people would not be able to break through in their lifetime. However, this bottleneck wasn't too difficult for the young leaders of the various forces. After breaking through to the immortal ascension boundary, how far they could go in the future would depend on their own efforts and opportunities. However, for most people, the peak immortal ascension boundary was their limit. Because of the appearance of these immortal ascension boundary masters, the number of pills produced in the pill room had also increased. Profound grade pills were used to cultivate one's soul, so the consumption of materials was also enormous. Fortunately, Yang Kai had accumulated a lot some time ago. The flags he had seized from Yang Kang and Yang Shen's houses had also been exchanged with the Bamboo Knot Gang for supplies, so the supply of materials wasn't a problem for the time being. In addition to the frequent breakthroughs of the younger cultivator, the older cultivator had also made significant breakthroughs. For example, Guan Kai-le of Blood Battle Gang had been stuck at the Immortal Ascension Boundary 3rd stage for 7 or 8 years. He had always thought that this was the limit of his cultivation and that he had reached his limit, but never had he imagined that after coming to Yang Kai's mansion and taking a mysterious grade pill to cultivate, in just half a month, the bottleneck that had plagued him for 7 or 8 years began to loosen, and after another half month, he successfully broke through to the Immortal Ascension Boundary 4th stage. Since then, His cultivation had been slowly increasing, and now, his Immortal Ascension Boundary 4th stage cultivation had completely stabilized. When he broke through to the Immortal Ascension Boundary 4th stage, Guan Kaila couldn't hold back his tears and had to be comforted by the Hu sisters. Not only Guan Kaila, but most of the Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters from the various great forces were in their 40s or 50s or even 60s. At this age, it was very difficult for them to improve their strength any further. However, ever since the alchemists from Medicine King's Valley began to refine pills, all of them began to show signs of loosening their bottlenecks, and they began to feel their ability to absorb world energy much faster than before, giving them the illusion that they had been reborn. None of them knew why this was happening. Although the quality of the mysterious grade pill was high, it was impossible for it to change a person's cultivation aptitude. However, the pills produced by Yang Kai's mansion's pill room had such an effect. The younger generation and older cultivator had all made breakthroughs, but the most gratifying one was the Blood Warriors' breakthroughs. Although because of the family's interference, the 9 Blood Warriors could only use Yingzhu and Tang Yuxian to participate in the inheritance war, Qiu Yimeng still didn't withhold their share in the supply of pills. Because the Qiu family's first young lady knew that these Blood Warriors were Yang Kai's future capital to establish himself in the Yang family, how could she neglect them? Today, most of the 9 Great Blood Warriors had broken through to the Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage. First, Yang Kai, Yang, Tang, Tangyu, and Xiao, and Xiao. Yang Yang's Yang S Yang, Yang Yang's Yang. All of the Blood Warriors were ecstatic and grateful. The hardships and difficulties of breaking through from the Immortal Ascension Boundary 8th stage to the 9th stage weren't something that could be explained in words. Given enough time, each of them had the capital and aptitude to break through to the Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage. But that was a matter of 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. The rapid improvement of everyone's strength was a joy to all who saw it. In the end, everyone could only deceive themselves by saying that Yang Kai's mansion's feng shui was very good. In fact, everyone knew that this was all thanks to the mysterious grade pills. The mysterious grade pills produced by Yang Kai's mansion seemed to have some magical and mysterious effects that could fundamentally improve a person's aptitude. Everyone kept it a secret. Inside his room, Yang Kai's expression was calm as he played with a small sword in his hand. This was the artifact Dongqing Han had obtained from Pojing Lake, a heaven-grade top-rank soul-type artifact. These past 2 months of retreat had greatly increased Yang Kai's strength. It was rare for him to have such a long period of time where he didn't care about anything else and only focused on cultivation. In his memory, the only time he had broken through to the Yuan Qi boundary in that isolated world was when he had entered retreat for several months. He was only 1 step away from the Immortal Ascension boundary. The cultivator in the mansion had a supply of mysterious grade pills, so how could Yang Kai, as the master of the mansion, not have any? On top of that, these pills were specially refined for him by his little senior sister, so their effects were much stronger than any other pill he had ever seen. His Yuan Qi had reached the standard of the Immortal Ascension boundary, and his soul had also become much stronger. After closing his eyes and concentrating, Yang Kai could even see the dazzling 5-colored soul-warming lotus. This supreme saint-grade pill had finally appeared in front of Yang Kai's eyes again. During these 2 months, Yang Kai had done nothing but cultivate, and refine the remaining 2 artifacts. The mysterious grade mid-rank mirror had long since been completely refined by him. At this moment, the small sword in his hand was also ready to be used. However, he was just a little bit away from breaking through to the Immortal Ascension boundary. Yang Kai always felt that this small sword was not completely compatible with his soul, perhaps it was because he still did not have a knowledge C. After all, this was a soul-type artifact. Although he could use it before reaching the Immortal Ascension boundary, he would not be able to fully display its functions. If he could fully integrate this small sword with his soul, Yang Kai believed that it would be time for him to break through. Thinking hard about it, Yang Kai was not in a hurry. He had been sitting like this for more than 10 days, observing the small sword in his hand with his divine sense, trying to integrate with it. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, waking Yang Kai from his contemplation. Taking a deep breath, he said, "Come in." The door opened and Qiu Yimeng walked in cautiously. Glancing at Yang Kai and seeing that he did not show any displeasure, she felt relieved. She knew that Yang Kai was in retreat trying to break through to the immortal ascension boundary and had not dared to disturb him for the past 2 months, but today she had no choice but to come, so naturally she was a bit nervous. "What's the matter?" Yang Kai looked up at her. After not seeing her for 2 months, the Qiu family's first young lady had become more and more radiant, causing Yang Kai's eyes to light up. Because of the difficulties in his cultivation, his mood had improved a lot. "There's a man named Pang Kai who wants to see you," Qiu Yimeng whispered. "Pang Kai?" Yang Kai frowned. "What is he doing here?" Pang Kai, the Bamboo Knot Gang's sect leader, was one of the first forces Yang Kai had gathered in the central capital. Yang Kai had not allowed them to participate in the inheritance war because, firstly, the strength of these people was uneven, so even if they entered the battlefield, they would only be slaughtered. Secondly, they were responsible for collecting supplies for Yang Kai in the central capital, inquiring about various intelligence, and delivering messages. After the start of the inheritance war, every month or so, the Bamboo Knot Gang would secretly transport a batch of supplies to Yang Kai's mansion in War City. After so long, Pang Kai had done a good job. However, each time he would not show up. After all, he was Yang Kai's ally, so it was definitely not safe for him to show up in War City. This time, however, he had come in person. Obviously there was something he wanted to report. Qiu Yimeng frowned slightly and replied, "He didn't say what it was, he only told me to tell you 2 words. I found it." Found it. In an instant, Yang Kai understood why Pang Kai had taken the risk to come to War City. As soon as Qiu Yimeng finished speaking, she felt her body become light and the wind whistled past her ears. The scenery in her field of vision quickly disappeared, and when she recovered, she found that Yang Kai was holding her waist with one hand and running at full speed. "Where is he?" As they hurried, Yang Kai asked anxiously. "The side hall," Qiu Yimeng replied, her expression changing slightly. From the time she had met Yang Kai until now, she had rarely seen him lose his composure, but now, he was undoubtedly showing a look of nervousness and expectation, his pair of eyes flashing with infinite anxiety. For some reason, Qiu Yimeng's heart trembled and she subconsciously grabbed Yang Kai's clothes and clung to him. She couldn't even figure out why she was doing this. The Qiu family's first young lady had never been a timid little girl, she had always been a wise and intelligent woman. The two of them looked very intimate as they flew through the house, like a whirlwind blowing past Hu Xing and Dong Qinghan. The Hu family young lord didn't even have time to say anything before Yang Kai disappeared. A moment later, a gust of wind came from behind, rolling up a cloud of dust. Hu Xing waved his folding fan and frowned. "Who is young Lord Kai carrying and running so fast?" "It seems, it's young Lady Qiu." Dong Qinghan wiped the sweat from his forehead and couldn't believe his eyes. "No way." Hu Xing couldn't help but stare, in broad daylight. Young Lord Kai couldn't have encountered a problem while cultivating. Why is he so anxious? Junior brother isn't that kind of person. Lan Chudai, who was next to Dong Qinghan, suddenly glared at Hu Xing. Hu Xing couldn't help smiling. "Beauty, I didn't say anything about him." Lan Chudai took a deep breath, her full breasts almost bursting out of her clothes as she turned around and left. After she left, Hu Xing slowly shook his head. "I'm afraid that girl won't be able to win young Lord Kai's favor. She and young Lord Kai are not the same kind of people." Dong Qinghan also smiled helplessly. Regarding Lan Chudi's thoughts, Dong Qinghan naturally understood, but falling flowers was not something he could interfere with. Especially now that there were so many beautiful women in the house, there were many who had a good impression of Yang Kai, but he had been in retreat for the past 2 months, like an ascetic monk with strict self-discipline, not leaving his room at all. If it were Hu Xing instead, he would likely spend every night indulging in debauchery. From a certain point of view, Fatty Dong also quite admired this cousin of his. He believed that the only one who could match Yang Kai was probably Qiu Yimeng. Lan Chudai, although good, was still missing something. In the main hall, Pang Kai was waiting. Although he had come with important information, he was still very nervous, constantly checking his clothes to see if there were any problems, sitting motionless in his chair. At the door, a figure flashed and Yang Kai appeared in Pang Kai's field of vision holding Qiu Yimeng. Pang Kai stared blankly, quickly coughing and shifting his gaze. Chapter 503. Slowly putting down Qiu Yimeng, Yang Kai stepped forward and walked over to Pang Kai. The Qiu family's first young lady's expression was calm, not showing the slightest hesitation because her intimacy with Yang Kai had been seen, but her doubts had only deepened. Because when Yang Kai released her just now, she clearly felt Yang Kai's hand tremble slightly. Being able to make such a determined man show such a reaction, this Pang Kai, what news did he bring? Little Lord. Seeing Yang Kai appear, Pang Kai quickly stood up and bowed, not bothering with any nonsense. The Bamboo Knot Gang's several hundred people have spent more than half a year searching and finally found the person Little Lord is looking for. We've found it. Yang Kai took a deep breath and asked, where? Before the start of the Inheritance War, Yang Kai had ordered the Bamboo Knot Gang to inquire about Su Yang and the others, and now they had finally found some clues. Northwest of War City, about 3,000 kilometers away, there is a small village surrounded by mountains. Those people seem to have been living there all this time. Are you sure? I'm basically sure. Although I haven't had any direct contact with them, according to Little Lord's description, they should be the people you're looking for. That village is a newly built one, more than a year ago, and the people inside are all cultivators, about 100 in total. Good, good, good. Yang Kai nodded repeatedly, a big stone falling from his heart, reaching out and patting Pang Kai on the shoulder. Very good. Pang Kai suddenly became very excited, his face flushing red as he said somewhat incoherently, this subordinate should do what he should. Saying so, he hurriedly took out something from his sleeve and handed it to Yang Kai. This is a map drawn by my subordinates. I hope it will be of some help to Little Lord. Good job. Yang Kai grinned and took the map, opening it up to see the location of the small village surrounded by mountains, instantly understanding it. This also confirmed Pang Kai's deduction, because this location was not far from the location where Yang Kai and Ling Taishu had been teleported out of the void. Su Yang and the others should have found their current location not long after leaving the void path and settled down in seclusion. Yang Kai, are you looking for someone? Qiu Yimeng came up and asked. She had been observing Yang Kai's reaction without saying a word. She noticed that the man's expression had changed drastically. She immediately realized that the person he was looking for must be very important to him. Okay. Yang Kai nodded and carefully put away the blueprint in his hand. What kind of person is he? Qiu Yimeng smiled slightly, intentionally or unintentionally inquiring. Some fellow disciples. Yang Kai took a deep breath, recalling Su Yang's appearance in his mind, his gaze softening. It's more than just fellow sect members, right? Qiu Yimeng smiled, also noticing something. Since you've found him, what do you plan to do? Go get them. Yang Kai smiled at her. No. Qiu Yimeng slowly shook her head. Yang Kai's smile quickly converged as he stared at her coldly, narrowing his eyes. What do you mean? Qiu Yimeng softly said, don't be angry, listen to me first. Since they are fellow disciples of your sect, they should be disciples of High Heaven Pavilion, right? High Heaven Pavilion is still an evil sect, the sect that produced the Demon Lord. If those people aren't exposed to the world, I'm afraid they won't be a problem, but if you bring them to War City, it will definitely arouse criticism. If they really come, do you think your second brother won't do something to disturb your mood? Especially now, all of your actions are related to the direction of the Inheritance War. Yang Kai's brow wrinkled, although he knew that Qiu Yimeng was telling the truth, he still couldn't agree. Qiu Yimeng continued, the Yang family's Inheritance War has been going on for more than half a year now. Even if your fellow disciples live in seclusion in the mountains, I'm sure they have heard about it. They know that you are in War City, but they still haven't come to seek shelter. Obviously they don't want to cause you any trouble. You rashly bringing them here will only waste their efforts. I know, that's why I need to bring them here. Yang Kai quickly said, although the place where they live in seclusion is good, since it was found by the Bamboo Knot Gang, it can also be found by others. Su Yang's group's strength was mixed. When they parted more than a year ago, there were a few immortal Ascension Boundary Masters, but their cultivation wasn't high. The rest of the disciples were Yuan Qi Boundary, separation and reunion boundary, and even a few Wudong boundary masters. If they were discovered by some great force, they would certainly not be able to escape. Only by arranging for them to stay with him could Yang Kai feel relieved. Qiu Yimeng's brow furrowed as she asked, "Do you really want them to come here?" "Yes, this point is not negotiable." Yang Kai nodded. Knowing Yang Kai's temperament, the Qiu family's first young lady knew that it was useless to say anything more, so she nodded. "Good, then I'll go for you." Yang Kai shook his head. "No, I'll go myself." "No." Qiu Yimeng suddenly became anxious. "What's wrong with you? Even if those people are very important to you, with your current situation and status, you can't just leave War City. How many people do you want to take with you?" "I'm just going to pick them up, not fight. Sneaking out and sneaking back isn't enough. 3,000 kilometers is only a matter of days." Yang Kai frowned. "What if your whereabouts are exposed? Even if you don't want to think about yourself, you have to think about your allies. They've paid so much, sacrificed so many people. Don't tell me they don't want to see you reach the end of the inheritance war. If something happens to you, how can you face them?" Saying so, Qiu Yimeng stepped forward, stretched out her hands, and grabbed Yang Kai's neck, like a little girl, her eyes filled with stubbornness as she put on an unyielding posture. Although he knew that Qiu Yimeng was thinking about him and the overall situation, Yang Kai still insisted and shook his head. "I have to go. If I don't go, they won't come." Since Su Yang and the others hadn't come to War City, they must have had many scruples. If Qiu Yimeng went to find them, not only would they not come to War City, they would likely disappear from the world's eyes again, making it difficult to find them again. "I don't care. If you want to pick them up, I'll go for you. In any case, you can't leave. Can't you be a little more mature?" "I'm a little woman, why would I need to be mature? Do you like mature women? Then who do you think caused all this?" Yang Kai's expression became impatient. He didn't like to be entangled with people. His style of doing things was also sharp and straightforward. Now that Qiu Yimeng was holding on to him, he was very depressed. Thinking about Su Yang and the others, he couldn't wait to grow wings and fly 3,000 kilometers away. "What?" Qiu Yimeng was stunned. "Nothing." Yang Kai wasn't willing to say more. If Qiu Yimeng hadn't brought people to High Heaven Pavilion to cause trouble, Yang Kai wouldn't have been sent to the ash-grey cloud evil land and wouldn't have been separated from Su Yang for so long. Speaking of which, the Qiu family's first young lady was the culprit behind the separation of Yang Kai and Su Yang. It was precisely because of this that Yang Kai's attitude towards Qiu Yimeng was very bad, but after the start of the inheritance war, his feelings of resistance and disgust slowly faded. There's still something I need to do in the gang. Little Lord, subordinate will take his leave first." Pang Kai felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. Finally finding an opportunity to interject, he quickly prepared to leave. "You can't go." Qiu Yimeng glanced at him. "Stay in the house for a few days." "Yes, subordinate will take his leave." Pang Kai knew that Qiu Yimeng was staying with him because she was afraid he would leak information. Although Qiu Yimeng's actions made him feel like he wasn't being trusted, he didn't dare complain. After Pang Kai left, Qiu Yimeng released Yang Kai, a look of reminiscence flashing across her eyes as she slowly said, "I remember when Xiaoman and I went to High Heaven Pavilion, under the coiling dragon stream, we saw you being very intimate with a woman. Is she the one you're thinking about?" "Yen." Yang Kai nodded. "What about Xia Ningchang?" Qiu Yimeng suddenly became curious. "It seems that your relationship with her is also not ordinary." Yang Kai looked at her strangely. "Can't I have two women?" Qiu Yimeng's face went black as she angrily shouted, "Shameless, shameless, just like that star's Hua." "Sure enough, all men were like this. You can do whatever you want, I won't care about you anymore." Saying so, the Qiu family's first young lady angrily left. Qiu Yimeng also knew that she couldn't persuade Yang Kai. Once this man made up his mind, no one could persuade him otherwise. What's more, what Yang Kai said was also reasonable. If he didn't go, those people from High Heaven Pavilion would definitely not come to War City. However, considering the overall situation, Qiu Yimeng had no choice but to try her best to stop Yang Kai. Unfortunately, she failed. Fortunately, War City had been calm recently, and even if Yang Kai wasn't in the house, the strength of the people in the house was enough to resist the enemy's attacks. That night, a figure disappeared into the night sky. No one noticed, only Qiu Yimeng knew it was Yang Kai. He had taken Ying Ju with him. Among all the blood warriors, only Ying Ju, who was proficient in concealment and assassination, had the qualifications and strength to quietly act with him. No one else was allowed. Once they acted, they would immediately be noticed. Meng Wu Ya and the old demon may have this ability, but Treasurer Meng didn't like to intervene in Yang Kai's affairs. As for the old demon, he had to stay behind. Otherwise, with only one top master in the house, Tang Yuxian, there may be some accidents. With the old demon and Tang Yuxian together, Yang Kai could sit back and relax. I hope he's fine. Qiu Yimeng sighed slightly. Because of the inheritance war, she still had to worry about the safety of this man, making her feel helpless. At the same time, in Yang Zhao's house, Yi Xinru walked into Yang Zhao's room and smiled. "Second young lord, there's news about what you wanted to inquire about."
"Oh."
Yang Zhao's brow rose as he suddenly showed a happy expression, reporting, "Pang Kai of the Central Capital's Bamboo Knot Gang seems to have arrived in War City today. After entering the little lord's house, he hasn't come out since." Chapter 504. They haven't come out yet. Yang Zhao's expression suddenly became playful, tapping his fingers on the table for a long time before asking, "Has there been any movement in Ninth Brother's house?" Yi Xinru shook her head, "Nothing." Yang Zhao stood up, an excited smile on his face as he clenched his fists. "That's right. Second young master, I don't quite understand." Yi Xinru wrinkled her delicate brow. "Why is there no movement?" "No movement means there has already been some movement." Yang Zhao smiled slightly. "Ninth Brother and Ying Ju have already moved out." "They've already moved out?" Yi Xinru was surprised. If the second young master's words were true, then Yang Kai's courage was simply too big. Ying Ju is proficient in concealment and assassination. He can come and go without a trace, entering and leaving War City without our people noticing. Yang Zhao explained patiently. "What about the little lord? Does he also have such ability?" Yi Xinru couldn't help curling her lips, subconsciously thinking that even if Yang Kai was strong, it was impossible for him to disappear silently like Ying Ju. One had to know that Yang Zhao had placed many spies around his house, so if there was even the slightest movement there, they would immediately be alerted to this place. "I didn't believe it at first, but I think Ninth Brother has this ability. Last time, when he attacked Fifth Brother's house, Eldest Brother brought people to restrain me. Do you know why? Obviously the eldest young master and little lord have formed an alliance." Yi Xinru was puzzled. "I naturally know this, but what's the problem?" "That's the problem. No one knows when Old Ninth formed an alliance with Big Brother. This means that he has the ability to go to Big Brother's residence and have a detailed discussion with him without us noticing. Otherwise, Big Brother wouldn't have acted rashly. If he could do this at that time, he can naturally do it now. What's more, Pang Kai entered Ninth Brother's house and didn't come out. Obviously he brought some particularly important information and was temporarily detained there. If this information wasn't important, Pang Kai should have left." Yi Xinru listened to Yang Zhao's analysis and couldn't help her beautiful eyes lighting up, feeling that what he said was very reasonable. "Interesting." Yang Zhao laughed. "The Bamboo Knot Gang is one of Ninth Brother's subordinate forces. I've known this for a long time. I also know that he asked the Bamboo Knot Gang to help him find something, whether it was someone or something. It doesn't matter if he's looking for someone or something, the little lord is determined to get it. And now, he's already gotten the information he wants." Yi Xinru's beautiful eyes flashed brilliantly, her thoughts having been enlightened by Yang Zhao, her mind gradually becoming clear. "If that's the case, we can do something about it." "That's exactly what I was thinking." Yang Zhao smiled lightly. "The key is that I don't know where Ninth Brother went. If I did, the inheritance war had been deadlocked for 2 months now, and although his own forces had grown a lot during this time, Yang Kai's side wasn't any worse. Yang Zhao naturally wanted to use all possible means to break this deadlock. Yang Kai going out was undoubtedly the best opportunity. As long as he could capture him, no matter how many masters he had in his house, they would be useless. Yang Zhao was still very wary of the masters in Yang Kai's house. Second young master, do you want me to go back to the central capital and ask the Bamboo Knot Gang for information? Yi Shinru suddenly proposed. It would be impossible to obtain any information from Yang Kai's house, but since this news was obtained by the Bamboo Knot Gang, there should be someone on their side who knew the details. The Bamboo Knot Gang, as far as I know, since the beginning of the Inheritance War, it has annexed a lot of small forces. Pang Kai's ability is limited, his management isn't very good, and his internal unity isn't very good. In particular, Mu Nando, who joined later, isn't very convinced by Pang Kai and isn't very loyal to Ninth Brother. It's only because of the Yang family's prestige that he's satisfied with the status quo. You should go find him. As long as you offer him the right conditions, I think he'll be willing to cooperate. Yang Zhao said. And if he doesn't cooperate? Yang Zhao smiled lightly, reaching out and pinching Yi Shinru's smooth chin, raising it slightly. I don't need to teach you that. I know. Yi Shinru's cheeks blushed, her beautiful eyes blurring as she nodded gently. There's no time to lose, you leave now. By tomorrow afternoon, I want accurate information. Yi Shinru smiled lightly, turned around, and rushed off into the night. Under the darkness of the night, two figures flashed through the air, crossing 1,000 meters in the blink of an eye. Yang Kai rushed ahead while Ying Ju followed behind. Even if the gap in strength between the two of them was an entire great realm, Ying Ju still had to use 80% of his strength to catch up with Yang Kai's speed. Knowing that Yang Kai must be extremely anxious, Ying Ju just silently followed behind Yang Kai, not saying a word, only the sound of their clothes fluttering in the night sky could be heard. After a day and night of galloping, even a master like Ying Ju was slightly out of breath and had to take a pill to supplement his yuan qi to maintain his peak state in case of any unexpected situations. On the other hand, Yang Kai's face didn't turn red nor did his heart beat faster. In addition to his expression becoming more and more excited, he didn't seem tired at all. Ying Ju didn't even see Yang Kai take a pill. He couldn't help feeling shocked. He really didn't know how much yuan qi Yang Kai had stored in his body for him to be able to act so leisurely. After a day and night of nearly 2,000 kilometers, Ying Ju was sure that the little lord had been flying at full speed. Was this not a burden or consumption for him? Yang Kai didn't stop to rest. Another night passed, and when the sun rose from the east, Yang Kai suddenly stopped, stood mid-air, and looked down. Below them was a dense forest, as if there were tens of thousands of mountains. It stretched up and down, and one couldn't see the end of it. Those ancient green trees towered into the sky, verdant and lush. Mist lingered around, and it was like an otherworldly paradise, ethereal and misty. In this mountain forest, there seemed to be some traces of monster beast activity as well as a lot of high-grade herbs. The 100 or so people from High Heaven Pavilion were living in seclusion in this mountain forest. It's a good place. Yang Kai smiled slightly, instantly spreading out his tyrannical spiritual energy in all directions, closing his eyes and extending his divine sense. He could clearly see every blade of grass and tree. The Bamboo Knot Gang members being able to find this place was probably due to luck. After all, this was not an easy place to find. After a while, Yang Kai took back his divine sense, a look of disappointment appearing on his face. Although the range of his divine sense was very large, he still couldn't detect anyone's aura, not even a trace of human activity. Little Lord, should we split up and search? Ying Ju asked. No need. Yang Kai shook his head. As long as we're within a certain range, I'll be able to detect them. Although Ying Ju didn't know what method Yang Kai used to detect them, he didn't say much. The map Pang Kai gave Yang Kai only had a general location and didn't describe it in detail, but based on this map, Yang Kai was still able to determine the direction he should be looking for. After an hour, Yang Kai, who was flying away, stopped again, his face suddenly filled with joy as he turned his head and looked in a certain direction. Come with me. Calling out to Ying Ju, he quickly flew in that direction. After the time it would take to drink a cup of tea, Ying Ju really found a cluster of newly built thatched huts in the mountain valley. The arrival of the two seemed to have alarmed the people who lived in seclusion here. Immediately, several immortal Ascension Boundary Masters came out of their huts and stared towards them, their eyes filled with vigilance. Ying-ju quietly glanced around and found that the strongest of these Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters was only an Immortal Ascension Boundary 4th Stage Master, and he wasn't young either, so his Yuan Qi wasn't that pure. Yang Kai couldn't help feeling a little strange. Shouldn't the sect where the Little Lord came from have an above Immortal Ascension Boundary Master? Now that a rising star like the Little Lord had appeared, how could the strength of these people be so poor? The people down below seemed to have seen Yang Kai's face and couldn't help letting out a light sigh as they pointed towards him, the vigilance on their faces quickly dissipating, replaced by joy. Before they arrived, Yang Kai smiled and waved to the people down below. The people down below quickly responded, one of them shouting a few words, and in an instant, the doors of all the huts opened and nearly 100 people walked out one after another, all of them extremely excited. Yang Kai also saw Sassafras, Li Yuntian, and the others and couldn't help feeling a sense of familiarity. After a while, Yang Kai and Ying-ju landed on the ground and hurriedly walked up, cupping their fists and greeting. Disciple greets several martial uncles. "How did you find us here?" One of the martial uncles, about 40 years old, asked suspiciously, "Shouldn't you be in War City participating in the inheritance war? There's nothing going on over there. Disciple has been looking for your whereabouts and only received accurate information a few days ago, so he hurried over." Yang Kai took a deep breath and replied while turning his head to look around. Many familiar and unfamiliar faces entered his eyes, but whether they knew him or not, whether they were familiar with him or not, at this moment, everyone was looking at Yang Kai excitedly. "Brother-in-law." Sassafras rushed to the front and called out. Yang Kai grinned meaningfully and patted him on the shoulder. Looking at Sassafras again, Yang Kai couldn't help feeling slightly moved. He had not seen him for more than a year, and Sassafras had actually grown from Separation and Reunion Boundary 9th Stage to Yuan Qi 5th Stage. Although this kind of strength wasn't very high among the younger generation, for Yang Kai it was already quite good. "Come in and talk," the several High Heaven Pavilion martial uncles warmly called out. The construction of this place was very simple, probably only enough for people to live in. After entering the house, the several martial uncles intentionally or unintentionally inquired about Ying-ju's identity. After learning that he was a young family blood warrior, all of them were suddenly shocked and became extremely cautious. The young family blood warrior, for them, was already an existence they could only look up to. Ying-ju didn't put on any airs and simply nodded slightly to anyone who came to greet him, but his naturally cold face still made the people from High Heaven Pavilion not dare to approach him. After serving tea, Yang Kai began to inquire about their situation over the past year. His martial uncles also began to talk about what had happened during this period. Chapter 505. Ever since they left the Void Edge sect, they had been hiding their identities and wandering around. Later, they learned that the sect had been burned down, and the whereabouts of the sect leader and several elders were unknown. They did not dare to rashly return, so they found a place here and temporarily settled down, waiting for the future to decide. This time, they had lived here until now. The news of the Yang family's inheritance war, they had indeed heard about it. Although they had been living in seclusion, every month they would send people out to inquire about various aspects of the situation. It was at that time that they learned about Yang Kai's true identity and the inheritance war. However, as Yang Kai had said before, even if they knew about the inheritance war and wanted to help Yang Kai, it was still not convenient for them to go to War City. Because High Heaven Pavilion's name as an evil sect had not been removed, going to War City would only bring unnecessary trouble to Yang Kai. After living here for more than a year, although it wasn't very convenient to communicate with the outside world, there were a lot fewer disputes. Except for the occasional monster beast attacks, everyone in High Heaven Pavilion was bitterly cultivating, looking forward to the day when they would be able to restore the sect's glory. "So you're saying that you don't know that the sect has been rebuilt?" Yang Kainyan asked after they finished speaking. "The sect has been rebuilt." The several martial uncles all looked stunned. "Ien, it should be rebuilt, but for the time being, I don't dare hang up the sect's signboard. High Heaven Pavilion can only be regarded as a temporary property of mine. I can only wait until the sect's name is restored before restoring it. I'm afraid that you're the only one who can do this," Thank you, martial nephew. The several martial uncles all saw the crux of the matter and firmly said, then we will have to trouble martial nephew in the future. Yang Kai gently nodded, this is disciple's duty. Then he asked, what about sect master and the several elders? Those martial uncles all had gloomy expressions on their faces. We don't have a clue at the moment. We only send a few people out every month to scout around. We don't know where the sect leader and the other elders are. Is that so? Yang Kai sighed and comforted them, it's fine, sect master is already an above immortal ascension boundary master, there aren't many people in this world who can hurt him. Hearing this news, everyone couldn't help but feel excited. Although they had heard about it before, when it came from Yang Kai's mouth, the weight of it was different. I came here this time to ask all of you martial uncles and brothers to accompany me back to War City. If martial uncles have no objections, then let the disciples pack up and we'll set off as soon as possible. The martial uncles looked at each other, and one of them said with a smile, we didn't want to trouble you to avoid making things difficult for you. However, since martial nephew has taken the initiative to invite us, it would be unreasonable for us to refuse. Even if we enter War City under the name of evil sect's disciples, as long as we have martial nephew's protection, no one should dare say anything, right? Yang Kai smiled coldly. Those who dare to say that won't live long. Only then did the martial uncles let go of the worries in their hearts and agreed. Then I'll go find her first. Su Yang. Yang Kai scratched his nose awkwardly. The expressions of the several martial uncles suddenly became awkward, the one who had spoken before nodding. Yes, I actually forgot about this matter. Please don't blame me, martial nephew. Turning his head, he shouted, Sassafras. Disciple is here. Sassafras responded and walked in. Lead Brother Yang to the frozen ice cave. Yes, Sassafras smiled lightly and gestured to Yang Kai, brother-in-law, come with me. Yang Kai lightly coughed and walked out. Yingju wanted to follow but was stopped by Yang Kai. Walking out with Sassafras, Yang Kai asked, Frozen ice cave? What is that place? It's the place where elder sister cultivates. Sassafras replied, it was precisely because we found a cold place here that was suitable for elder sister to cultivate that we decided to temporarily live here. But when I went to see elder sister last time, she seemed to have said that she was going into retreat. I don't know if she's done yet. She is indeed in retreat. Yang Kai nodded. If she wasn't in retreat, how could Su Yang not come out to greet him? Dozens of kilometers away, Yang Kai sensed the existence of Su Yang. The art of yin-yang joyous unification had created an indelible bond between the two of them. Since Yang Kai could sense her, she could naturally sense Yang Kai's existence as well. But now, it was probably inconvenient for elder sister Su to leave her retreat so she didn't show up. As the distance between the two of them closed, Yang Kai's yuan qi began to fluctuate uncontrollably, as if there was an invisible vortex that was pulling at his yuan qi. That was Su Yang's energy. After not cultivating the art of yin-yang joyous unification for such a long time, no matter who it was, both of them desperately wanted to be comforted by the other. Yang Kai's usually calm mood began to fluctuate. The ice cave was not far from where they lived, only about 3 kilometers away. After a while, Sassafras led Yang Kai to a cave that was overflowing with cold air. Even from the outside, they could clearly see the cold air pouring out of the cave. It was a spectacular sight. Around the cave, there was not a single blade of grass, and there was frozen soil everywhere. Sassafras had already reached the 5th level of yuan qi, but when he was about 10 feet away from the cave, he stopped and said, Brother-in-law, you should go in yourself. That damned place is too cold, I don't know how it was formed. Only elder sister can withstand it, even the other martial uncles can't go in. Okay, you can go back. Hee, brother-in-law, enjoy your meal. Sassafras laughed and turned to leave. Yang Kai shook his head, took a deep breath, and entered the ice cave. A cold feeling came from all directions, as if even the yuan qi in his body could be frozen. Circulating his true yang secret art, Yang Kai dispelled the obstruction of the cold and walked step by step into the cave. All around him were smooth and cold blocks of ice. This ice cave did not have any traces of artificial excavation. It was completely a natural place. He did not know where the light came from, but the ice was like a mirror, reflecting the light, so the cave was not dark. The deeper he went, the colder it became. Yang Kai circulated his true yang secret art faster and faster. After walking for a full cup of tea's time, Yang Kai's field of vision suddenly opened up. This should be the innermost layer of the ice cave. The cold was incomparably strong, and it was no longer as narrow as before. Instead, it was an open space. With just a glance, Yang Kai saw Su Yang. Her beautiful hair that was like silk and satin hung down like a cloth, covering her round and perky buttocks. Her skin was white as snow and suffused with a sheen that was like the most exquisite porcelain. She had an exquisite nose, pink cheeks, cherry lips that exhaled like orchids, and delicate dimples that were white as snow and sparkling like jade. Su Yang was the same as before, like an exquisite ice doll. At this moment, she was sitting cross-legged on a crystal-clear ice bed, her eyes closed in meditation, her tender body trembling slightly, showing the excitement in her heart at this moment. Suddenly, the yuan qi in Su Yang's body fluctuated, clearly visible. Her tender body, her face, and even all her exposed skin was quickly covered with a layer of frost. Yang Kai could not help but change his expression. His figure flickered and appeared in front of Su Yang, directly sitting down cross-legged, gently holding her hands, and circulating the yin-yang joyous unification art. At the same time, the yuan qi in Su Yang's body also began to circulate according to the joyous unification art. The fluctuating yuan qi stabilized, and the yuan qi fluctuations in their bodies, the rhythm of their breathing, and the frequency of their heartbeats gradually began to coincide. After an unknown amount of time, Yang Kai gently exhaled and opened his eyes. Opposite him, Su Yang's beautiful eyes also slowly opened, her long eyelashes trembling, as if she could not believe that Yang Kai had actually found her, but soon, an intoxicating blush and a happy smile appeared on her cold face. But, even if I'm here, you don't need to be so excited, right? Something almost went wrong. Yang Kai chuckled. Su Yang obviously had not yet finished her retreat. Because she had sensed Yang Kai's arrival, her breathing had become chaotic. If it were not for Yang Kai's timely help, who knows what would have happened. Su Yang's face reddened, and she was about to speak when she felt a strong force pushing her onto the ice bed, causing her to involuntarily cry out in panic. Looking up, she saw Yang Kai's eyes burning with a raging fire, his breathing heavy, like a ferocious beast choosing its prey. His eyes seemed to want to swallow Su Yang alive, full of undisguised aggression. Being stared at by such a pair of eyes, Su Yang could not help but breathe heavily, suddenly realizing what was about to happen. Yang. Just as she spat out the first word, Su Yang felt Yang Kai press down on her, directly blocking her mouth and preventing her from spitting out the next word. After a slight squirming, Su Yang stretched out her two white arms and wrapped them around Yang Kai's neck, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. Their breathing gradually became heavy. In this extremely cold environment, on that sparkling jade-like ice bed, a man and a woman were entangled with each other. There was no need to say anything. There was only intense violation and selfless response. Their clothes were scattered, and although this cold could freeze the world, it could not freeze the young man and woman's body and mind. Su Yang's crystal white skin was quickly exposed to the air. Her soft breasts were full, her snow-white skin was tinged with a rosy glow, and her pair of slender legs were covered in fragrant grass. Every inch of her skin caused Yang Kai to linger, leaving behind a rich aftertaste. Su Yang's face was flushed red, her eyes glowing with a strange light. She felt that Kai Yang was like a wild beast that had just been released from its cage, releasing himself on top of her delicate body without the slightest bit of tenderness. What made her feel ashamed was that this kind of roughness actually made her feel even more pleasure, causing her heart to flutter and her mind to be in a daze. Accompanied by a stifling yet heart-wrenching moan, Su Yang's body tensed up as she bit her lip, bracing herself for the storm-like impact. Lashing to his heart's content, Su Yang's cries grew louder and louder, stimulating Kai Yang's nerves more and more. It was as if everything in the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them who were engrossed in each other. The dragon pattern on Yang Kai's back and the phoenix pattern on Su Yang's back also seemed to come to life, quickly swimming across their skin. Chapter 506. The two slowly woke up, their lower bodies still tightly joined together, and the air was filled with a rotting smell that made Su Yang shy. She couldn't help but shrink into Yang Kai's arms, but just as she was about to move, she couldn't help but cry out in alarm, looking at Yang Kai's eyes with both fear and expectation. She felt that the thing inside her body had once again become hard, like a red-hot iron, burning her whole body, causing her to twitch uncontrollably. With just a slight movement, it brought about an incomparably strong stimulation. Yang. Just like before, she had only managed to utter a single word when Su Yang's voice was replaced by a moan. The tidal wave of impact made it impossible for her to open her mouth and utter a complete sentence, only whispering and moaning could be heard. The two gave and took as much as they liked, blending together like water, without any distinction between each other. Su Yang didn't know how many times she had woken up, but her body was still trembling unconsciously. Her snow-white body was suffused with an enchanting red light, and between her slender legs, there was a pool of mud. Yang Kai. Biting her thin red lips, Su Yang stared at the ceiling of the ice cave, her beautiful eyes blurred, like a fish on the brink of death, weakly saying, "Let me go, I can't do it anymore." Even now, she still felt like she was floating in the clouds. This feeling made her infatuated, but also terrified her. She couldn't resist Yang Kai's demands, and even though she knew in her heart that it was time to stop, her body still reacted instinctively, fiercely responding to his demands. Towards this man's impact, she was both afraid and in love with him. "Then let's stop here for now." Yang Kai grinned, "We'll fight another day." Su Yang slowly got up, resisting the soreness in her waist, and glared at him. "It's all your fault. You only cared about. We haven't even started cultivating yet." Yang Kai laughed dryly. The yin-yang joyous unification art with Su Yang had already reached the second stage, so there was no need for them to have sex to dual cultivate, but Yang Kai still chose to use the most instinctive and barbaric method to possess the woman in front of him, not even thinking about cultivating. "I'm afraid it's too late to cultivate now. Let's talk about it when we get back." Yang Kai shook his head. "We seem to have been here for more than 2 days. The several martial uncles should be anxious." Ien. Su Yang's face suddenly became bright red. A man and a woman alone together for 2 days, even a fool could guess what would happen. Even if Su Yang's temperament was mild, she couldn't help but feel a kind of shyness from not being able to see anyone again. She slowly got up, like a virtuous wife to a husband's heart to help Yang Kai. Yang SSSSS, SSSSSSS, SSSSSSSS. SSSSSS to break. Almost. Just a little more. Yang Kai nodded, his eyes flashing as he stared at Su Yang. "But you've already reached the immortal ascension boundary 3rd stage. It seems that if I want to catch up to you, I'll have to work harder." "That's all thanks to the medicinal liquid you gave me." Su Yang nodded lightly. "That thing can really cleanse my body. My cultivation speed is now much faster than before, and here, there is a very suitable cultivation environment for me." More than a year ago, when he separated from Su Yang, she was only at the peak of the Yuan Qi boundary, the same as Yang Kai now, only a step away from breaking through to the immortal ascension boundary. Now that they met again, she was already at the immortal ascension boundary 3rd stage. Such a cultivation speed was simply incredible. After all, after a cultivator reached the immortal ascension boundary, the speed at which their strength increased was relatively slow. No matter how good your external strength is, if you don't have a solid foundation, it's not enough. In the end, it's all because of your talent. Yang Kai reached out and gently stroked Su Yang's cheek, suddenly burying his head between her 2 peaks and taking a deep breath, as if he wanted to imprint this enchanting scent deep in his mind. Su Yang smiled softly and quietly hugged him. After a while, Yang Kai straightened up and glanced down at his crotch, helplessly saying, "I seem to have ooh-ah." Su Yang was shocked. Yang Kai's expression suddenly became firm. "In any case, they've already waited for more than 2 days. It doesn't matter if they wait a little longer." Saying so, he pulled Su Yang into his arms. After an hour, Yang Kai was satisfied and watched Su Yang quickly dress herself before helping Yang Kai with his clothes. After suffering a loss once, how could she dare to show her body in front of Yang Kai again? If she allowed this man to continue like this, she feared it would be 10 days or half a month before they could leave the ice cave. After the two of them were fully dressed, Su Yang reluctantly looked back at the ice cave. After leaving this place, she didn't know when she would be able to return. This place was very suitable for her to cultivate and gather cold chi very quickly. It wasn't easy for a cultivator to find a suitable place to cultivate. What do you want to take away? Yang Kai saw Su Yang's reluctance and asked. Su Yang shook her head and said with some regret, I can't take it away, I'll have to come back later. I can take it away. Yang Kai's lips curled into a smile. Su Yang glanced at him and chuckled, this ice bed, can you take it away with you? Yang Kai nodded, a serious expression on his face. No need, this seems to be 10,000-year-old ice. I tried to lift it, but I couldn't. Even if you can move it, it's impossible to take it elsewhere. The small bag you gave me before couldn't hold this thing. Su Yang had a universe bag in her hands. This universe bag was originally given to Yang Kai by Ling Tai-shu, and after opening the black book space, it was transferred to Su Yang by Yang Kai. However, the space in that universe bag wasn't big enough to hold such a large ice bed. Look. Yang Kai grinned meaningfully and walked over to the ice bed that still had their auras on it, reaching out and covering it with his hand. Su Yang's expression froze. Although she didn't know what Yang Kai was doing, she faintly felt a sense of expectation, as if this man would do something very unexpected. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, she saw a flash of light appear on the ice bed that weighed 10,000 kilograms and immediately disappear. Su Yang's mouth opened slightly, almost unable to believe her eyes. She immediately released her divine sense but couldn't find the slightest clue, causing her brow to wrinkle slightly as a look of suspicion appeared on her face. Where did it go? Looking at the proud Yang Kai, Su Yang hurriedly asked. I have another artifact that can store things, and its space is much larger than your universe bag. Yang Kai smiled lightly. Su Yang gently nodded, no wonder. Learning that Yang Kai had such a priceless treasure, Su Yang was only slightly shocked before immediately feeling a sense of pride in her heart. Because this was her man, his methods were amazing and his heritage was strong. Su Yang secretly thought to herself, sharing glory and glory together, feeling a sense of pride. It seemed that as long as Yang Kai made a move, even if he pierced a hole in the heavens, it was only natural. The frigid cold in the ice cave was all because of the ice bed. It could be said that the ice bed was the only treasure in this place. As long as she had it, Su Yang could create her ideal cultivation environment wherever she wanted. In the village, everyone was ready to go. Several of the High Heaven Pavilion's martial uncles sat down, their expressions meticulous and their attitudes cautious. To the side, Yingju also sat there silently. The atmosphere was particularly dignified. Several of the High Heaven Pavilion's martial uncles had been accompanying the Yang family blood warrior for 2 days now, not moving at all. At first, they wanted to talk to Yingju, but Yingju was a man of few words, so how could they have a conversation? In the end, the several martial uncles stopped talking and everyone waited like they were sitting on pins and needles, not to mention how uncomfortable it was. Everyone was wondering in their hearts why Yang Kai hadn't returned yet. The younger generation of disciples seemed to have noticed the strange atmosphere here and didn't dare approach within 300 meters, all of them hiding far away, lest they be dragged along by their martial uncles and become scapegoats. Just as they were feeling anxious, Sassafras rushed in from the outside and cupped his fists. Several martial uncles, Brother Yang and elder sister have returned. Returned? The several martial uncles felt as if they had been granted amnesty and quickly got up, their faces filled with a mixture of wanting to cry and laugh as they hurried out. They weren't willing to stay here for even a breath longer. Facing such a powerful and indifferent Yang family blood warrior, any one of them would feel a great deal of pressure. Just as they stepped out of the door, they saw Yang Kai and Su Yang walking over together. One of the martial uncles had tears in his eyes as he stepped forward and grabbed Yang Kai's big hand, shaking it vigorously as he said, "Martial nephew, you've finally returned, we've been waiting for a long time." Tchem. Yang Kai frowned, wondering why these martial uncles had suddenly become so enthusiastic. When he came here 2 days ago, they weren't like this. Su Yang, who was standing to the side, misunderstood and overheard these words. Her face couldn't help blushing bright red, somewhat embarrassed to meet these people, her cold face flushed red, making her more attractive than ever. "We're all ready, Marshal nephew, please. If you're ready then let's go." Young Kai nodded. "Let's go." The marshal uncle waved his hand and shouted loudly. Then, he and the other marshal uncles rushed out in a hurry. Young Kai was stunned, not understanding why these marshal uncles were so anxious, as if they were about to be reincarnated. "Little Lord." Yingju came up and greeted him. "What happened?" Young Kai frowned and asked. "Nothing." Yingju shook his head, inadvertently glancing over at Su Yang, his expression changing slightly. He discovered that although this woman with a cold temperament and stunning appearance was not very old, her cultivation had already reached the immortal ascension boundary 3rd stage. The Liu family's Liu Qingyaro was only an immortal ascension boundary 3rd stage cultivator, but he was the central capital's #1 genius, the future successor of the Liu family. But what about her? This woman was incredible. In an instant, Yingju realized just how terrifying High Heaven Pavilion was. The Demon Lord was from High Heaven Pavilion, the Little Lord was also from High Heaven Pavilion, and this woman in front of him was even more so. This sect even had an above immortal ascension boundary master. It seemed that the veiled Xia girl who was performing alchemy in his house and Meng Wu Wei who lifted his chi binding seal were both from High Heaven Pavilion. Was this sect really just a second-class sect? Yingju suddenly became confused. Chapter 507. More than 100 people from High Heaven Pavilion, under the leadership of Yang Kai, were quickly rushing towards War City. When they arrived here, it had only taken Yang Kai and Yingju less than 2 days, including the time it took to find them. But now, Yang Kai estimated that it would take at least 4 or 5 days to return. After all, the strength of these brothers and sisters was somewhat mixed. Although many of them had broken through to the Yuan Qi boundary, there were still many separation and reunion boundary and Qi transformation boundary cultivators. Yang Kai wasn't in a hurry though, simply chatting and laughing with Su Yang as he led the way, enjoying this moment of leisure. After not seeing Su Yang for more than a year, the physical and mental bond between the two had not faded and had instead become even stronger. Walking side by side with her, Yang Kai could even feel that the Yuan Qi in their bodies was fusing in a very strange way. From time to time, it was as if a single thought from the other could be faintly understood by the other. This feeling was quite wonderful. Heart and body as one, heart and heart as one, it was likely they were not far from each other. At this moment, nearly 2,000 kilometers away from War City, a large number of people were lurking in the thick grass, quietly waiting. At the head of this group was Qiu Ziruo of the central capital's Qiu family, Qiu Yimeng's half-brother. Qiu Ziruo was originally an ally of the Yang family's 6th young lord, Yang Shen, but on that night, Yang Kai had attacked Yang Shen's house and taken away his flag, forcing him to withdraw. Yang Shen's forces had been transferred to the 7th young lord, Yang Ying, and Qiu Ziruo had followed Yang Ying. A few days later, Yang Ying took the initiative to forfeit and gathered his cultivators in Yang Zhao's house. Qiu Ziruo had now changed his allegiance 3 times, causing him to feel extremely depressed. Although this kind of change was inevitable, it was still a loss of face for him. At the very least, his vision was very problematic. Whichever Yang family young lord he followed, that Yang family young lord would be eliminated. Before the start of the inheritance war, he, Qiu Yimeng, and the Qiu family patriarch, Qiu Shoucheng, had discussed the direction of the inheritance war. Qiu Yimeng was very optimistic about Yang Kai, so she didn't hesitate to temporarily leave the family and bring a group of Autumn Rain Hall members to join him. Facts proved that Qiu Yimeng had chosen a good ally. As for Yang Shen, who Qiu Ziruo and Qiu Shoucheng both thought highly of, he was unable to last until the end. Qiu Ziruo also held his breath and vowed to assist Yang Zhao in winning the inheritance war in order to consolidate his position as the family's successor. In addition to Qiu Ziruo, the Kang family's Kang Zhon was also here. These two were the young lords of the central capital's 8 great families, as well as the future patriarchs of the 8 great families. If they wanted to deal with Yang Kai, without the help of the 8 great families, it would be impossible to control the situation, so these two had been sent out by Yang Zhao. As for Yang Zhao himself, he had to remain in War City. If he left, he would likely follow in Yang Shen's footsteps. Beside them were the Xiong clan's Xiong Chu and the Nan clan's Nan Sheng. These two families had countless grievances with Yang Kai, so when they learned that they were going to send troops to deal with Yang Kai, they naturally took the initiative to volunteer, so that they could wash away their previous humiliation. Yang Zhao readily agreed. Apart from that, there were 3 or 4 other forces that weren't weak, and they were all gathered here. Brother Kang, is the information second young lord obtained accurate? That Yang Kai wouldn't act so recklessly, right? After waiting for more than a day without any news, Chouzi Ruo couldn't help feeling a little impatient. Kang Zhon heard this and chuckled. Brother Chiu, please wait patiently. Since second young lord said so, there should be no problem. Chouzi Ruo couldn't help glancing over at Kang Zhon suspiciously. Brother Kang seems to hold second young lord in high regard. Kang Zhon smiled lightly. I'm not afraid Brother Chiu will laugh at me. In fact, at the beginning of the Inheritance War, I wanted to ally with second young lord. Because I felt that with second young lord's methods, he would be able to achieve great things.
Oh.
Then why did you choose seventh young lord? Chouzi Ruo raised his brow, not quite understanding. Kang Zhon was originally an ally of Yang Ying's seventh young lord, but after Yang Ying abstained, he switched allegiance to Yang Zhao. I had no choice. Kang Zhon smiled bitterly and shook his head. Second young lord chose Yi Xin Ru of the Yi family, so I could only choose someone else. Chouzi Ruo's eyes flashed a trace of understanding and ambiguity as he nodded. Beautiful women always have some advantages. En. All men like beautiful women, especially Yi Xin Ru's delicate appearance. Kang Zhon licked his lips. Chouzi Ruo also grinned meaningfully. As young lords and young ladies of the central capital's 8 great families, the two of them were quite familiar with Yi Xin Ru's character and background. Naturally, they knew that this woman's relationship with Yang Zhao was not ordinary. It was also because of this that Yi Xin Ru was now very important to Yang Zhao. Although Chouzi Ruo and Kang Zhon were both Yang Zhao's allies, their status was not as high as Yi Xin Ru's. However, they didn't care much about this. Obviously their status wasn't low either. This news is said to have been obtained by that woman herself when she went to the central capital to inquire about it. Kang Zhon smiled wretchedly. With the Yi family's first young lady personally taking action, how could a trivial vice-sect leader of an underground force not be able to handle him? I'm afraid that with just a little bit of sweetness, she'll fall head over heels for him. That's true. Chouzi Ruo nodded, thinking that if Yi Xin Ru used a beauty trap on him, would he be able to keep this a secret? Especially when his life was on the line. Even if Yang Kai is smart, I'm afraid he never imagined that with just a few clues, the second young lord would be able to infer that he had left War City. Kang Zhon smiled softly. He thinks his plan is watertight, but in fact, there are still some flaws. No one is perfect. Chouzi Ruo shook his head slightly. Yang Kai is about the same age as us. If he had been too perfect, how could we still live? Kang Zhon nodded. Having said that, it was still undeniable that Yang Kai's methods were extraordinary. If it weren't for the second young lord's meticulous attention to detail, it was likely he wouldn't have been able to grasp this rare opportunity. Young Master Xiong, Young Master Nan, Yingju by Yang Kai's side, I'll have to rely on the masters from your 2 families to contain him. Kang Zhon suddenly turned to Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng and said. Xiong Chu nodded and faintly said, it's my duty. Nan Sheng's face flashed a trace of malice and viciousness as he stroked his broken finger and coldly declared, this time our 2 families have dispatched 2 peak immortal ascension boundary masters in order to contain that Yingju. As long as we can avenge my broken finger, my Nan family will follow the 2 young lords' orders. Kang Zhon glanced at him and nodded slightly, no longer saying anything. Yang Kai had a peak immortal ascension boundary demon in his house, and it was because of this demon master's provocation that Yang Zhao had asked the Xiong and Nan families to send 2 peak immortal ascension boundary masters to assist him. Such a master would rarely appear in the Inheritance War. After all, even first-class forces didn't have many peak immortal ascension boundary masters. If one of them died in the Inheritance War, it would be a big loss for those forces. However, Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng obviously hated Yang Kai to the extreme, so in the face of Yang Zhao's request, they readily agreed. These two masters had only been in Yang Kai's house for about a month. Their original intention was to prepare for a rainy day and suppress the evil demon masters who were targeting Yang Kai's house, but now they had come in handy. Although Ying Ju was a young family blood warrior and his strength was also at the Immortal Ascension Boundary 8th stage, 2 peak Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters should be enough to contain him, right? Regarding this battle, no matter who it was, everyone was full of confidence. None of them could have imagined that the current Ying Ju was already a peak Immortal Ascension Boundary Master. More and more people were sent out to investigate the surrounding situation, all of them holding their breaths and restraining their auras as they waited quietly. A day later, there was finally news. About 100 people were approaching this place. In about an hour, they would arrive here. Kang Zhon's expression shook as he shouted, "Everyone, if we can eliminate Yang Kai here, after returning to the house, Second Young Lord will definitely look upon us in a new light. I hope all of you will not underestimate this enemy." Everyone nodded. "Should we launch a sneak attack?" Chiozi Ruo asked excitedly. Kang Zhon glanced over at him and frowned, shaking his head. "Our scouts were able to discover them, so they must have also discovered us. How can we launch a sneak attack? Let's fight openly. I want Yang Kai to regret offending me." Nan Sheng grinned, his yuan qi rising fiercely. "That's right, we'll go out and fight openly. After today, there will no longer be a Yang Kai in the inheritance war." Kang Zhon shouted, "Let's go." 30 kilometers away, Yang Kai's expression was gloomy, unable to figure out where he had gone wrong. Yang Zhao had only been able to infer his actions based on the movements of Bamboo Knot Gang's sect master Pang Kai, so how could Yang Kai have known? When he discovered that someone was spying on them from a distance, he immediately realized that something was wrong. The other party had been able to block his path back so clearly, obviously they knew where he was going. It was impossible for Pang Kai to betray him. He should still be in Qiu Yimeng's house, and Qiu Yimeng wouldn't have leaked this information. The problem lay with the other members of the Bamboo Knot Gang. In an instant, Yang Kai came to a conclusion. It seemed that he would have to clean up after returning. However, even so, Yang Kai didn't regret his actions. If he could choose again, he would still choose to come out and greet the High Heaven Pavilion people. All for the sake of meeting Su Yang earlier. Perceiving the change in Yang Kai's mood, Su Yang couldn't help asking, "What's wrong?" Yang Kai smiled slightly and shook his head, "Nothing, there's just someone blocking the way." Su Yang's face immediately became gloomy. Last time, she and Yang Kai had agreed to travel the world hand in hand, but Qiu Yimeng had disrupted their plans, causing them to be separated for more than a year. This time, she had only just reunited with Yang Kai, but now she had run into trouble again. Su Yang hated these people who disrupted her time with Yang Kai. Who's blocking the way? The several High Heaven Pavilion martial uncles behind suddenly became nervous. "It's probably my second brother's people." Yang Kai took a deep breath. Yong Wei shouldn't have done such a thing, nor did he have the capital to do so. Inferring, the people blocking the way should be Yang Zhao's subordinates. Several martial uncles, there may be a fight. "You don't need to worry about me, just protect the sect's disciples." "Can't we avoid them?" The current strength of High Heaven Pavilion's people was too weak, so the several martial uncles were obviously fighting. "They came prepared, we can't avoid them." Yang Kai shook his head helplessly, his heart filled with annoyance. Chapter 508. Even though High Heaven Pavilion was only a second-class sect, it still had several thousand disciples. However, after the last calamity, only 100 or so disciples remained loyal to the sect. Although there were still many people in High Heaven Pavilion, their loyalty to the sect was obviously not as good as the disciples here. These people were the foundation of High Heaven Pavilion's revival. They absolutely could not suffer any more losses. The news of a possible battle quickly spread, and although many of the High Heaven Pavilion disciples were somewhat surprised, none of them showed any fear. On the contrary, people like Sassafras actually showed some excitement. They had been hiding from the wind and waves for more than a year, and they had had enough of hiding. Now that they had Kai Yang's protection, they naturally didn't need to fear anything. Instead, they felt a little ignorant, because they didn't know what kind of enemy they were about to face. Yang Kai's brow furrowed. Yang Kai sending people to intercept them was completely beyond his expectations. Since the other party dared to do this, they must be confident they could at least delay Ying Ju. This meant that the other party had a peak immortal ascension boundary master. However, the other party sending such a large number of people would certainly not be able to hide from Qiu Yimeng's spies. Perhaps, the people from his residence were also rushing over here. Considering all this, Yang Kai suddenly felt relieved. Moreover, this wasn't a dead end. They had probably misjudged Ying Ju's true strength. Now that he had reached the immortal ascension boundary 9th stage, his combat power was much greater than before. They didn't know his true strength, and there was also the variable Su Yang. If Yang Zhao's manpower was based on the previous situation, then this time was a good opportunity, but soon, Yang Kai found that he had underestimated Yang Zhao's fear of him. Suddenly, a dense crowd of people appeared in front of him. Yang Kai swept the crowd with his divine sense and couldn't help smiling bitterly. The other party had dispatched at least 7 forces. Among them, Yang Kai recognized 4 of them, the Qiu family and Kang family of the central capital, as well as the Xiong family and Nan family of the first-class forces. It could be said that this was a group of well-trained people. At first glance, seeing so many people, the High Heaven Pavilion members couldn't help but be surprised. They hadn't expected the other side to have so many people. The martial uncles were even more shocked. They instantly understood how important Yang Kai was to the enemy. In order to capture him, they didn't hesitate to send so many people, so many experts. In the wilderness, the 2 groups of people collided. They were separated by a distance of over 300 meters as they looked at each other from afar. 2 pairs of venomous eyes swept over. Following their gazes, Yang Kai rushed towards Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng and sneered. Qiu Ziruo's expression was complicated as he stared at the fearless Yang Kai, not knowing what to think. Kang Zhon, on the other hand, remained calm. On the other hand, many of the others were pointing at Su Yang, who was standing beside Yang Kai. Such a person with such a tranquil temperament was naturally very eye-catching. Looking at her, whether man or woman, old or young, all of them couldn't help feeling a sense of inferiority. Even the 2 young lords from the central capital felt the same. It wasn't that they hadn't seen beautiful women before. With their identity and status, they could have as many as they wanted. However, Su Yang's temperament made them feel that even they weren't qualified to associate with her. On the contrary, when Yang Kai stood next to her, it was as if they were a perfect match. Thinking so, Qiu Ziruo and Kang Zhon's faces couldn't help going black. They didn't think they were any worse than Yang Kai. Lightly coughing, Kang Zhon cupped his fists and shouted, "Ninth young lord, it's been a long time." "Brother Kang." Yang Kai nodded lightly, his expression calm. "Is my second brother not here?" "Second young lord is busy. This time it was me and brother Qiu who were entertaining ninth young lord. I hope ninth young lord can be magnanimous." Yang Kai sneered and stepped forward, proudly saying, "My second brother didn't come personally and instead sent you 2 here to be scapegoats." Kang Zhon's face sank as he coldly said, "Ninth young lord, brother Qiu and I are friends. You don't need to speak so harshly, right? I and you too have some kind of friendship." Yang Kai tilted his head and chuckled, "How come I don't remember?" With Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo, it could be said that Yang Kai didn't have any communication with them. The former, on the other hand, had a few drinks with him not long after returning to the central capital, but they ended up parting on bad terms. As for Qiu Ziruo, he hadn't even spoken to him. Kang Zhon let out a sigh of relief and shouted, "Since ninth young lord says so, this Kang won't waste any more words. We really don't have any kind of friendship. Let's see who's the real deal. If you offend me in any way, you can only blame yourself for ninth young lord's bad luck." Likewise, Kang Zhon continued, "Before we left, second young lord told us that if ninth young lord was willing to surrender, we shouldn't embarrass you, so as not to harm your brotherly relationship. So this Kang still has to ask, regarding second young lord's good intentions, is ninth young lord willing to accept?" Yang Kai smiled and shook his head, "You already know, why bother asking?" "Good." Kang Zhon nodded firmly. Why bother talking nonsense with him? The masters from my Xiong and Nan families will hold back Yingju, the rest of us will rush up and capture him. Nan Sheng's eyes flashed with anger, wishing he could defeat Yang Kai right now and thoroughly humiliate him in order to vent the resentment in these bastards' hearts. Kang Zhon's brow wrinkled, but he didn't say anything. He knew that Nan Sheng's resentment towards Yang Kai was quite deep. Moreover, this was exactly what he planned to do. Although Yang Kai had brought a lot of people with him, only a few of them had reached the immortal ascension boundary, so the people from High Heaven Pavilion were nothing in Kang Zhon's eyes. Just as he was about to give the order, Yang Kai's voice called out again, "Brother Kang, how about we discuss this?" "What's the matter?" Kang Zhon frowned. "In this battle, only Yingju and I will fight. If you can defeat me and Yingju, then you'll have earned a great merit in front of my second brother." Listening to him say this, Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo couldn't help staring at him in disbelief. They hadn't expected that Yang Kai didn't intend to use the 100 or so helpers he had brought with him. Although those 100 or so people were nothing in Kang Zhon's eyes, if they really fought, they would definitely be able to cause some losses to his side. So when he heard Yang Kai's proposal, Kang Zhon subconsciously thought that Yang Kai wanted to play some kind of trick and hesitated. On Yang Kai's side, the several High Heaven Pavilion martial uncles and martial seniors all expressed their willingness to lend a hand. Even if they had to die in battle, they couldn't just stand by and watch, all of them resolute. "You can't afford to lose anything." Yang Kai shook his head and refused their good intentions, his expression dignified. "I am a Yang family member, they won't dare kill me. If they can't beat me, I can run, they can't do anything to me. But if you go up and suffer casualties, how can I explain this to Grand Master? Martial uncles and martial seniors don't have to help, but I will." Su Yang stared at Yang Kai firmly. Yang Kai looked at her, pondered for a moment, and then nodded. Su Yang's strength was the same as his own, so he couldn't judge her based on her cultivation. On top of that, if she dual cultivated with him and fought side by side, there may be some unexpected effects. Su Yang smiled. "Brother Kang, I've changed my mind. I have 3 people on my side, me, Yingju, and my senior sister Su Yang." Yang Kai shouted casually, "Defeat us and I'll withdraw from the inheritance war." Kang Zhon was still trying to guess what Yang Kai was planning to do, but when he heard this, his expression became strange. He felt that Yang Kai really did have such a plan and wasn't trying to play some kind of trick. It seems that those people are very important to Yang Kai, even making him want to protect them. Nan Sheng grinned, his aura becoming dangerous, like a cold viper as he stared towards the High Heaven Pavilion group. Xiong Chu also sneered to the side. Kang Zhon frowned and asked, "Ninth young lord, can you tell me why?" "No reason." Yang Kai slowly shook his head. "These people are my sect's martial uncles and brothers and sisters. If any of them were to be injured, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to control myself, and if I were to kill them. If I were to kill you and young Master Qiu, you wouldn't be able to return to War City and would have no way to explain to the Kang family and Qiu family." "Evil sect's High Heaven Pavilion?" Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo's expressions changed, suddenly understanding what sect these 100 or so people belonged to, a trace of dread appearing in their hearts. High Heaven Pavilion couldn't be treated the same as other second-class sects. It was a sect that had produced a demon lord. "This proposal is good for both you and me. How about Brother Kang consider it carefully?" Yang Kai urged. "Young Lord Kang, don't agree." Nan Sheng licked his lips as he gloomily stared at the group. Evil sect's people can be killed by anyone. Who knows when a new demon lord will appear among these people? Killing all of them now would be a good precaution. "I think so too." Xiong Chu nodded in agreement. Kang Zhon glanced over at them and snorted, knowing that they wanted to take advantage of the situation. Yang Kai had already made his intentions clear, yet they still wanted to counterattack Yang Kai, obviously wanting him to suffer in order to avenge their past grievances. Qiu Ziruo shook his head and said, "Brother Kang, I don't think there's anything wrong with agreeing. In this situation, we have the absolute advantage. At the right time, we can sell him a favor. I don't think second young lord is willing to go too far." In Qiu Ziruo's opinion, capturing Yang Kai this time was already a foregone conclusion, without any suspense. Since that was the case, there was no need to really provoke him. Killing the 100 or so people from High Heaven Pavilion wouldn't help them win the inheritance war, it would only make Yang Kai bear a grudge against everyone here. Qiu Ziruo didn't want to be targeted by Yang Kai, after all, he was a somewhat unruly man. Hearing this, Kang Zhon nodded gently. What Brother Qiu says makes sense. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu glanced at each other and couldn't help seeing the annoyance in each other's hearts. In front of them was a perfect opportunity to retaliate against Yang Kai, but they didn't have the right to choose, so naturally they were feeling depressed. Ninth Young Lord, I agree. Kang Zhon shouted loudly, this battle won't affect your sex people, provided they don't intervene, otherwise, they'll be responsible for their own death. Of course. Yang Kai gently sighed and smiled, in fact, I'm doing this for your own good. Chapter 509. Listening to Yang Kai's words, even Kang Zhon, who had a good temper, couldn't help coldly snorting, shameless boasting. Agreeing to his proposal was nothing more than not wanting to annoy him. In Kang Zhon's opinion, he was simply giving him face, but now the other party was actually saying it was for his own good. Naturally, he was annoyed by this kind of excuse of waiting for an advantage and pretending to be obedient. Not bothering with this, Kang Zhon waved his hand, Brother Xiong, Brother Nan, send your people out. Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng nodded, and in the next moment, 2 streaks of light shot out from the crowd. Their speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, they had arrived in front of Yang Kai and the others. One of these 2 was from the Xiong family while the other was from the Nan family, both old men at the peak immortal ascension boundary. If it weren't for Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng asking for help from their families, the Xiong and Nan family wouldn't have sent them to participate in the inheritance war. Without any hesitation, the 2 of them immediately attacked Yingju. Ferocious attacks filled the air as they flew towards Yingju, intending to severely injure him. 2 peak immortal ascension boundary masters attacking at the same time was truly extraordinary. In just a moment, all the High Heaven Pavilion members felt like they were about to fall apart. This unparalleled power seemed to have created a vortex that sucked in all of their lives. Everyone was shocked, their faces pale. Under such overwhelming power, the High Heaven Pavilion members couldn't even muster up the will to resist. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu both sneered proudly, secretly looking forward to the moment when Yingju would be forced to use his mad tyrant blood skill. Yingju's expression remained indifferent, and just as this violent attack was about to reach him, he suddenly disappeared. The masters from the Xiong and Nan families were startled, instantly losing their target. Immediately, a sense of foreboding filled their hearts. Hurriedly retreating, a murderous intent quietly approached them from behind. A silhouette so fast that the naked eye could not see it clearly was waving 2 daggers that flickered with cold light, coming from behind to attack. Shadow dancing kill. The void was filled with violent energy, and ripples spread out in all directions like ripples that were created when something was thrown into a lake. Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng's proud expressions instantly froze, their eyes trembling violently as they stared at the sky in disbelief. Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo were also stunned. Everyone shuddered at the strength Yingju had displayed. Yang Kai chuckled and said lightly, "Martial uncles, please lead the brothers back a little."
Oh.
The several martial uncles seemed to have awoken from a dream. In the midst of a battle between 3 peak immortal ascension boundary masters, they instantly understood that even if they joined the fray, they would only be able to cause more unnecessary deaths, so they quickly led everyone away. Only Yang Kai and Su Yang were left standing side by side. A gust of wind blew past, sweeping up Su Yang's long hair, covering half of her face. Turning her head, she and Yang Kai exchanged a glance, both of them smiling knowingly. Swish, swish, swish. In the sky, the 3 people fighting fiercely separated and looked at each other. Yingju was the same as before, his expression indifferent, his body unscathed. On the contrary, the faces of the masters from the Xiong and Nan families were ashen. Many of their robes were torn, and although they weren't injured, this battle made everyone realize that Yingju was no longer the same Yingju as before. It also made them realize just how terrifying the combat power of the Yang family blood warriors was. Invincible within the same realm, fighting above one's realm was a common occurrence. This was the young family blood warrior. 2 isn't enough. Ying-ju gripped his 2 daggers in both hands, faintly shaking his head towards the 2 masters from the Seong and Nan families. These words irritated the 2 masters, causing their expressions to become even uglier. Brother Kang, Ying-ju seems to have broken through to the Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage. Chiozi Ruo also saw the situation had taken a turn for the worse. In their original plan, with 2 peak Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters entangled with Ying-ju, as long as they lost this powerful ally, the rest of them would be able to capture Yang Kai, but now, Sai Yang was actually an Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage Ying-ju, ruining their original plan. If 2 isn't enough, then send more people up. Kang Zhon was also stunned for a moment before coldly saying. Chiozi Ruo nodded, nodding to several masters in his camp who immediately flew up and stood behind the 2 masters from the Seong and Nan families. 2 Immortal Ascension 8th stage and 2 Immortal Ascension 7th stage masters. In addition to the 2 Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage masters from before, a total of 6 people were confronting Ying-ju, but Ying-ju's expression remained unchanged. Instead, the 4 masters who had just stepped up looked uneasy. Still not enough. Ying-ju shook his head. You want to restrain me? Send more people. Kang Zhon and Chiozi Ruo's expression became cold, secretly thinking that this Ying-ju was too arrogant. Even if he was a young family blood warrior, even if he was an Immortal Ascension 9th stage master, in the end, he was still just one person. Mad Tyrant Blood Skill. Ying-ju suddenly shouted, his vitality madly rising, his yuan qi also fluctuating violently. Everyone's expression changed greatly, never having expected Ying-ju to so decisively use the Blood Warrior's forbidden technique. This was a secret technique that forcibly increased one's vitality at the cost of one's own vitality. Every time it was used, a Blood Warrior's lifespan would be greatly reduced. Therefore, the Yang family Blood Warriors, no matter how strong they were, generally didn't have long lifespans. In the blink of an eye, Ying-ju's aura changed, his previous indifferent aura becoming extremely violent, his entire exposed skin becoming as red as a roasted crab, a terrifying red. Shua. Ying-ju seemed to move, but also didn't, but the masters who were confronting him were all shocked, all of them involuntarily retreating a few steps. Pu. The sound of blood splashing rang out, and a moment later, an Immortal Ascension Boundary 7th stage master who hadn't even had time to exchange a single blow with Ying-ju suddenly fell from the sky with a dull look on his face. From his throat, blood spurted out like a fountain, and before he even hit the ground, his entire body exploded into a bloody mist, not even his bones remaining. A chill rose from the bottom of everyone's heart, causing them to shiver. Do you think it's enough? Ying-ju twirled the 2 daggers in his hands, his fingers dancing gracefully like butterflies, emitting a despairing aura of death. If you think it's enough, then I'll kill you all. As soon as his voice fell, the Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage masters from the Seong and Nan families shouted, "Be careful." At the same time, all of them stepped forward, summoned their most prized artifacts, and displayed their best methods, sending out a violent wave of energy. Ying-ju's figure shuttled back and forth in this wave of energy, like a lone boat in the midst of a violent storm, rising and falling but never sinking. All Immortal Ascension Boundary 8th stage masters, go! Kang Zhon no longer dared to underestimate Ying-ju. With his Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th stage strength and his Mad Tyrant blood skill, Ying-ju was already capable of exchanging blows with an above Immortal Ascension Boundary master. The few people standing in front of him weren't enough to contain him. Kang Zhon immediately issued an order for reinforcements. Shua 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 from the crowd, 4 or 5 figures appeared one after another, all of them Immortal Ascension Boundary 8th stage cultivator, the number of people these 7 forces could gather. With the addition of these people, Ying-ju's leisurely demeanor finally stagnated for a moment, but it still couldn't stop his strange pace. He was like an indestructible sharp blade. Wherever the 2 daggers slashed, there would be panic in the hearts of the people there. Ying-ju, who was proficient in concealment and assassination, in this one versus many situation, actually held the complete dominance, his figure constantly flickering, causing everyone to feel as if a big stone had been lifted from their hearts, not daring to relax in the slightest. It's still not enough. Kang Zhon's eyes flashed a look of despair, but just as he finished speaking, the only remaining Immortal Ascension Boundary 7th Stage Master in the sky let out a scream and fell to the ground. "Elder!" someone exclaimed. This person was from one of the 7 forces. His force wasn't too strong, so the loss of an Immortal Ascension Boundary 7th Stage Master was not a small blow to the entire force. Glancing around, the Immortal Ascension Boundary 7th Stage Master's 2 arms had suddenly been separated from his body as he fell, the place where his severed arms had been severed from his body, blood spurting out from them. "Send more people." Kang Zhon's face went pale as he continued to order. The several Immortal Ascension Boundary 7th Stage Masters in the crowd glanced at each other before helplessly rushing forward. With the addition of these people, Yingju's movements were truly restrained, no longer being able to act as freely as before. With his own strength, he was able to pin down 2 Immortal Ascension Boundary 9th Stage Masters, 6 Immortal Ascension Boundary 8th Stage Masters, and 5 Immortal Ascension Boundary 7th Stage Masters. The strength of the Yang family blood warriors had exceeded everyone's expectations. Even Yingju himself was quite surprised. Before his breakthrough, he had often imagined how much his strength would increase after he broke through. He had also accurately estimated that after his breakthrough, his Mad Tyrant blood skill might be able to pin down some masters, but it was absolutely impossible for him to face so many of them now. Such a number and level of masters had greatly exceeded Yingju's original estimation of himself. He didn't understand why, but he knew that he had done just that. Although it was somewhat difficult for him to cope with this situation, he wouldn't have to worry about his life in the short term. Was it because of the mysterious grade pills produced in the pill room? Yingju didn't know, but all he could do now was exert his strength to the greatest extent possible and reduce the burden on Yang Kai as much as possible. Looking at Yingju, who seemed to be struggling, Kang Zhon and Qiuzi Ruo couldn't help breathing a sigh of relief. This situation was something they had never imagined before, so they secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, the second young lord had prepared ahead of time and had allowed the 2 of them to bring so many people. If the 2 of them had followed their original proposal, they probably wouldn't have been able to deal with Yingju alone, let alone capture Yang Kai. The second young lord was truly far-sighted. At this moment, both Kang Zhon and Qiuzi Ruo couldn't help feeling a trace of admiration for Yang Zhao. "It's our turn." Kang Zhon took a deep breath and turned his eyes to Yang Kai, who had been standing in place all this time. Yingju had already been pinned down, so all that was left was to capture Yang Kai. Although most of the masters had been sent out, Kang Zhon was still confident in capturing Yang Kai. After all, he and Qiuzi Ruo each had 2 Immortal Ascension 5th Stage Masters from the 8 great families as well as many from the other forces. With such a lineup, Kang Zhon didn't believe they couldn't capture Yang Kai. Chapter 510. It's our turn. Yang Kai withdrew his gaze from the sky and softly said to Su Yang. Su Yang nodded slightly, brushing her hair back behind her ear as she smiled. "This seems to be the 3rd time we've fought side by side." 3 times. Yang Kai was stunned. "Did you forget?" Su Yang turned her head and glanced at him. "The first time was in the Heaven's Cave Inheritance, when you saved my life. The second time was under the Coiling Dragon Stream, when you brought up the rear. This is the 3rd time. Does the first time count?" "Of course it counts." Su Yang smiled happily and whispered, "You helped me the first 2 times, but this time, I'll help you." Yang Kai tilted his head and looked at her, chuckling and nodding. "Good." Seeing the 2 of them whispering to each other, seemingly flirting with each other, Kang Zhon and Qiuzi Ruo couldn't help feeling their noses become crooked. They felt like they had been completely underestimated. Waving their hands coldly, the 4 Immortal Ascension Boundary 5th Stage Masters from the Kang and Qiu families stepped forward to meet Yang Kai and Su Yang. Their movements were neither fast nor slow, and their expressions were indifferent. It was obvious that they had full confidence in capturing Kai Yang. The 1,000-meter distance between them was quickly closed. The smile on Yang Kai's face gradually converged as he stared at the 4 approaching masters with a dignified expression. These 4 were not ordinary Immortal Ascension Boundary 5th Stage Masters, they were Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters from the 8 great families, each of them possessing extraordinary means. "I should be able to deal with 1.5. Su Yang wrinkled her brow, also feeling a lot of pressure from these four masters. I'm about the same. Yang Kai nodded gently, relying on his own strength. He could only accomplish this much, but if he used all of his means, he might not be able to. The four masters arrived a few dozen meters in front of Yang Kai and stopped, politely cupping their fists and greeting him. Ninth young lord, please excuse us. Life or death is your own responsibility. Yang Kai grinned. His arrogant words caused the four people's faces to darken. One of them coldly shouted, Ninth young master, just make your move. Before he had even finished speaking, Yang Kai and Su Yang both moved at the same time. One was as hot as the sun, while the other was as cold as ice. Two completely different energies burst out at the same time. There was no prior communication, no verbal connection, only a spiritual bond, allowing the two of them to see through each other's thoughts. A fiery red yuan qi rushed towards them like a raging inferno, enveloping the four of them. Perceiving the power contained in this pure and surging yuan qi, all four of them couldn't help but frown. Only now did they realize that the reason Yang Kai was able to tie with Liu Qingyaro that day was not because Liu Qingyaro wanted to let him win. He had the strength and capital to do so. Behind the raging flames, sharp icicles lined up like swords, emitting ear-piercing whistling sounds as they shot towards the four people. Tens of thousands of icicles, densely packed together, were like a swarm of locusts, unstoppable, and filled the air with a bone-chilling chill, leaving the four people with no way to advance or retreat. Each icicle contained an extremely cold qi, and its impact was extremely shocking. These icicles were condensed from the ice qi in her body, and even the immortal ascension boundary masters from the 8 great families didn't dare underestimate them. As soon as Su Yang made a move, it was clearly extraordinary. On the contrary, Yang Kai's hot yuan qi seemed insignificant in comparison. Of the four people, 2 didn't move, but the other 2 let out a deep roar at the same time. 7 colored lights shot out from their bodies, forming a thin film in front of them. When the hot true qi and icicles hit them, they were all blocked. Not only that, but the 2 of them also stretched out their hands and sent out a burst of powerful qi, shattering the overwhelming icicles. Yang Kai and Su Yang's first joint attack had been completely ineffective. Just as the 4 immortal ascension boundary masters relaxed their vigilance, the hot yuan qi and ice qi that had been blocked suddenly underwent an unexpected and mysterious fusion. The attacks that had been blocked for a moment and were about to be annihilated suddenly surged like a tide, pressing in with even more intensity. Compared to before, they were more aggressive and more intimidating. The four people's expressions changed greatly, and the 2 immortal ascension boundary masters who hadn't yet taken action also hurriedly used their own methods. Asterisk hong hong hong, asterisk like a tidal wave, each attack stronger than the last. The 7-colored defensive film in front of the 4 immortal ascension boundary masters was shattered, and a cold and hot energy enveloped them, making them thoroughly understand what it meant to be tortured by ice and fire. Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo watched this scene in a daze. The scene in front of them immediately made them realize how big the gap between them and Yang Kai was, and they couldn't help feeling a deep sense of powerlessness. Facing Liu Qingyaro, they could still think of catching up, hoping that one day they would be able to catch up to him. But facing Yang Kai, they couldn't bring themselves to do so and could only look up at him from behind. This sense of cowardice and inferiority made Kang Zhon angry, shouting angrily, "Don't show mercy, the 9th young lord won't die so easily." The 4 masters who were resisting the impact of the hot and cold energy all wore cold expressions and no longer held back, madly condensing their strength, and with a roar, they tore open a gap in the ice and fire barrier and leapt out, using all their martial skills and artifacts to greet Yang Kai. Yang Kai had just summoned his bone shield and swallowed a few attacks, but before he had time to counterattack, the 2 masters from the Kang family had already closed in. At such a close distance, the bone shield was unable to absorb enough energy to counterattack. Accompanied by 2 loud roars, Yang Kai sent out his white tiger seal and divine ox seal, fiercely tearing at the 2 masters. Gaining a little time to catch his breath, Yang Kai quickly opened up some distance between himself and the 2 masters, glancing over at Su Yang and quickly discovering that she was being entangled by the 2 masters from the Qiu family. Yang Kai and Su Yang both cultivated the yin-yang joyous unification art, which allowed the two of them to display extraordinary strength when fighting side by side, but the other four had obviously noticed this at a glance, which was why they had separated him and Su Yang in an attempt to defeat them one by one. If they really fought like this, with the bone shield's protection, there wouldn't be any problems. No matter how powerful these four's methods were, they wouldn't be able to hurt him, but Su Yang would be in imminent danger. Yang Kai wanted to help and join up with Su Yang, but the two masters from the Kang family continued to entangle Yang Kai, not leaving his side. There shouldn't be a problem. Seeing that the situation was good, Kang Zhon finally relaxed and nodded lightly. Qiuzi Ruo also secretly wiped his cold sweat and smiled bitterly. I didn't expect Ninth Young Lord's methods to be so amazing. He's strong, I can understand that, but who is that woman? How is she so strong? Kang Zhon stared at Su Yang, a puzzled look on his face. That woman is definitely the most important one to Yang Kai. Nan Sheng grinned meaningfully, his expression becoming somewhat restless. Since he wanted to retaliate against Yang Kai, naturally he wanted to teach him the most profound and painful lesson. If this woman was accidentally killed by the two masters from the Qiu family, that would be interesting. Nan Sheng was secretly looking forward to it. Although he knew it was unlikely to happen, he couldn't help thinking so. He even wondered if he should intervene and create some kind of unexpected situation. However, when he saw the tyrannical strength of this woman, Nan Sheng still felt a little discouraged. His strength wasn't high, so even if he went up, it would be useless. Young Lord Nan, this time we're only here to capture Yang Kai, Kang Zhon saw through his thoughts and warned. Heh, I know, Nan Sheng nodded. While they were talking, the four Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters began suppressing Yang Kai and Su Yang more and more. The masters from a super force were really different. Even if there were only two Immortal Ascension Boundary 5th Stage Masters, Yang Kai was still able to suppress them. Between the two of them, he couldn't rush to Su Yang's aid, nor could he release the energy in his bone shield to counterattack, so he could only passively defend. Seeing that the situation on Su Yang's side was getting worse and worse, Yang Kai's expression gradually became cold. The bone shield in his hand that had been acting as a defensive shield suddenly disappeared and was replaced by an antique-looking mirror. This mirror exuded a bone-chilling aura, and on its surface there was even a faint snowy white image. A dangerous aura spread out from the mirror. Realizing that something was wrong, the two masters from the Kang family both paled and rushed towards Yang Kai, trying to interfere with his actions. But it was too late. Suddenly, a ripple spread out from the mirror. As the ripple spread, an icy chill instantly enveloped this part of the world. Hua, an incomparably huge, snowy barrier suddenly appeared, enveloping Yang Kai, Su Yang, and the four Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters from the Kang family and Qiu family. A mysterious grade artifact. Kang Zhon exclaimed. Looking around, he couldn't see anything but the white snow around him. Inside the enchantment on the ground, there was only wind and snow that filled the sky. Just by looking at it, one could not help but feel a bone-piercing chill, let alone being inside it. A few strange peaks were faintly discernible within the barrier, and they were covered in a silvery white color. How could it be a mysterious grade artifact? Kang Zhon's face went pale. Although he knew that Yang Kai had another mysterious grade artifact in addition to his bone shield, he had never expected it to be of this type. When such an artifact was summoned, it was tantamount to isolating the two sides inside the barrier, making it impossible for them to come out until a winner was decided. As the owner of this artifact, Yang Kai undoubtedly had an absolute advantage in this battle. The attributes of this artifact seemed to be the same as that woman's secret art. In an instant, Kang Zhon realized that the situation wasn't good. The power of a mysterious grade artifact was something he had experienced deeply. As the young lord of one of the central capital's 8 great families, he naturally had a mysterious grade artifact on him. Hurry up and break the defenses of this artifact. Kang Zhon instantly ordered, leading a group of people with Qiuzi Ruo to quickly rush forward. Inside the silvery white world, Yang Kai and Su Yang finally reunited. Looking around at the snowy white scenery and the towering ice mountains, Su Yang couldn't help taking a deep breath, her full breasts bouncing up and down as a look of excitement appeared on her face. Being in this place, She felt like she was in heaven, her yuan qi circulating several times faster than usual. Chapter 5:11. As soon as this mirror-shaped mysterious grade artifact was summoned, Su Yang's aura underwent an earth-shattering change. She was obviously standing right next to Yang Kai, but in the eyes of the four masters from the Kang family and Qiu family, she seemed to be everywhere. In other words, this woman, at this moment, had become one with this mysterious grade artifact, inseparable. The four masters paled, unable to understand why this was happening. This mysterious grade artifact was clearly taken out by Yang Kai. How could this woman produce such a resonance with this artifact? This phenomenon was also noticed by Yang Kai and Su Yang, both of them exchanging a glance with each other, seeing the excitement in each other's eyes. Before using this mirror artifact, Yang Kai had not expected such an effect. But now, he understood. He and Su Yang both cultivated the joyous unification art, so their bodies and minds were bound together. The artifacts he refined could, to a certain extent, be used by Su Yang. Correspondingly, the artifacts Su Yang refined could also be used by Yang Kai. It was equivalent to the two of them sharing each other's artifacts. In particular, this ice attribute artifact was very compatible with Su Yang's yuan qi attribute. It could be said that it was tailor-made for her. Su Yang could fully utilize the functions of this artifact, something even Yang Kai could not do. After all, Yang Kai's yuan qi attribute was completely opposite to this artifact's. When Yang Kai had obtained this artifact at Pojing Lake, it was only because he felt that its grade might be relatively high, an unintentional action that had led to the current situation. It's a barrier-type artifact. One of the Kang family masters observed the surroundings, his expression becoming dignified. The others also nodded. They were all knowledgeable people, so naturally they could see the tyrannical nature of this artifact at a glance. The periphery of this artifact was covered by a layer of barriers, creating a territory suitable for battle. Without breaking this barrier, it was impossible to break through the blockade of this artifact. However, wanting to break through this barrier was definitely not an easy task, especially under the watchful eyes of Yang Kai and Su Yang. How could the four of them dare to act rashly? The chilly wind whistled, the ground was covered with a thick layer of snow, and the sky was still constantly sprinkling snow like goose feathers. Even the yuan qi seemed to be frozen. The four masters madly circulated their secret arts, but they were still unable to resist the erosion of the cold. In just a moment, their hair, beards, and clothes were all covered in frost. How do you feel? Yang Kai did not pay any attention to the four masters and instead asked Su Yang. My strength has increased, I feel like I'm to the point of omnipotence. Su Yang lightly breathed in the cold air, but to her, it was to no avail. Su Yang, Yang Kai, and Yang Kai. To her, to him, to say, to her to him, to her, to him, she was to him. Yang Kai laughed. Good, then this artifact will be yours to use from now on. Yes. Su Yang nodded lightly, not showing any intention of refusing. Accepting a gift from her man was a matter of course. The conversation between the two reached the ears of the four immortal Ascension Boundary Masters, causing them to suddenly become displeased. Although this mysterious grade artifact was amazing, they were not mediocre. How could they be so willing to be despised by two juniors? I'll try, Su Yang said softly, waving her hand casually towards the four masters. The cold wind suddenly became even colder, causing the faces of the four masters to change. Although they still stood firmly in place, under the howling cold wind, their hair and beards began to form slender icicles at a speed visible to the naked eye. The madly circulating yuan qi was unable to resist this cold wind, causing the bodies of the four masters to show signs of trembling slightly. Su Yang also began to move, her brow furrowed slightly, seemingly familiarizing herself with the power of this artifact. As she moved, her cold yuan qi slowly began to connect with the frozen world around her. Cracking sounds could be heard from the ground as dense ice spikes suddenly shot out from the several feet deep layer of snow, bringing with them a strong wind and rolling up thousands of layers of snow. It was as if a snowy mountain was collapsing as it enveloped the four of them. There was no road to heaven, no door to earth. The four masters from the superforces all felt extremely troubled. The speed of the yuan qi circulation had been greatly affected by the cold, causing them to be unable to react as quickly as they had been at their peak. Hurriedly, they used their martial skills and artifacts to block this attack, but before they had time to catch their breath, Su Yang's next attack had already arrived. On the surrounding icebergs that were wrapped in silver, rays of light as bright as day flashed. It seemed that in the distance, someone was throwing a fierce attack at the four of them. Yang Kai stood beside Su Yang, motionless, his mood fluctuating. He hadn't expected that with the help of such a mysterious grade artifact, Su Yang would be able to display such strength. With just her own strength, she was able to force 4 Immortal Ascension 5th Stage Masters from the Central Capital 8 Great Families to such an extent that they could only defend without any opportunity to counterattack. This artifact had created the most ideal battle environment for Su Yang. In this world, she was the master of all. He, who should have been the owner of this artifact, had instead become a spectator. The power of this artifact was indeed terrifying, but Su Yang's strength was also indisputable. The combination of the strong and the strong had created the scene in front of him. Defeating these 4 masters was only a matter of time. Seeing Su Yang's performance, Yang Kai's heart calmed down. Outside the barrier, Kang Zhon and Qiuzi Ruo had already rushed over with their own people, none of them daring to approach within a 300-meter radius. The cold aura emanating from inside was too strong, so even if they were 300 meters away, they still had to circulate their secret arts to resist the cold. Break it! Kang Zhon roared, taking the lead, taking out a mysterious grade artifact he normally wouldn't use, pouring his yuan qi into it and attacking the semicircular barrier in front of him. Layers of ripples quickly appeared on the barrier, and the wind and snow drifting inside seemed to suddenly stop for a moment. After this attack, Kang Zhon was slightly out of breath. His strength wasn't very high, so using a mysterious grade artifact put a heavy burden on him. Fortunately, Qiuzi Ruo also had an artifact of the same grade, and the other cultivator were also frantically releasing their own attacks. After a series of attacks, the barrier seemed to show signs of weakening, allowing Kang Zhon to see some hope, shouting excitedly, "Don't stop, hurry up and break it open." The longer this battle dragged on, the more unfavorable it would be for his side. Most of the masters had already been sent out to contain Yingju, so if the 4 Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters from the Central Capital 8 Great Families were also killed inside this barrier, Kang Zhon really couldn't think of any means to capture Yang Kai. Right now, Kang Zhon was more anxious than anyone else. Everyone was unceremoniously pouring out their yuan qi, only wanting to break open the semicircular barrier in front of them as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a few shouts came from not far away, causing Kang Zhon to be startled. Quickly turning his head to look, his face suddenly became livid as he shouted angrily, "Xiong Chu, Nan Sheng, what are you doing?" Over there, Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng had actually led the Xiong and Nan family forces to sneak over to where the High Heaven Pavilion group was. Since the start of the battle, these people had been standing here, quietly observing the situation, as if Yang Kai and Kang Zhon had agreed, not intending to intervene in the battle. However, when everyone was attacking the barrier, Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu turned their attention to them. After a brief moment, they were discovered by Kang Zhon. Nan Sheng, who was facing off against the High Heaven Pavilion group, suddenly showed an impatient expression, ignoring Kang Zhon's questioning and shouting towards the High Heaven Pavilion group, "Obediently surrender, otherwise I'll make you suffer. I don't have time to play with you." The several martial uncles and grandmasters all wore ugly expressions as they stood in front of the young disciples. Although their hearts were filled with anger, they couldn't do anything about it, quickly asking, "Two friends, just now my martial nephew Yang reached an agreement with your leader, why do you still want to go back on your word?" Nan Sheng sneered, "What agreement? I don't know, but if you want to find someone who reached an agreement with Yang Kai, then go find them. Do you really think your High Heaven Pavilion is a tiger's ass that can't be touched? This young master will make a move today and see what Yang Kai can do to me. Your Excellency, don't go too far. Go too far." Nan Sheng laughed. "Go tell that to Yang Kai and see if he knows what it means to go too far." Saying so, he coldly shouted, "Surround them, anyone who dares to resist, kill without question. Doesn't Yang Kai care about you? I'd like to see how much he cares about you." The people from the Nan family and Seong family all rushed forward and surrounded the High Heaven Pavilion group, all of them glaring at Nan Sheng. The High Heaven Pavilion group was furious, and the younger generation disciples were even more enraged. Seeing that the situation was about to escalate into a fight between the two sides, Kang Zhon hurriedly rushed over and grabbed Nan Sheng's collar, gritting his teeth as he shouted, "What are you doing?" Nan Sheng didn't seem to care and just smiled lightly, reaching out and breaking Kang Zhon's grip, lightly saying, "Young Lord Kang, do you think the four masters from your Kang family and Cho family can catch young Kai?" Kang Zhon frowned, his expression becoming unpleasant as he coldly snorted, "What does catching him have to do with what you're doing now?" "Naturally, it has something to do with it." Nan Sheng's expression was calm, not showing the slightest tension. If those four people can't catch young Kai, this operation can basically be considered a failure. We've dispatched so many people, yet we can't even defeat 3 of them, if word of this spreads out. Hehe, young Lord Kang, I don't need to explain what the consequences will be, right? What do you mean? Kang Zhon gradually calmed down. Just now, when he saw Nan Sheng and Seong Chu acting against the High Heaven Pavilion group, he thought these 2 guys were going to start a massacre to vent their anger. Naturally, he was furious. First, Nan Sheng and Seong Chu didn't put his orders in their eyes, and second, he didn't want to offend young Kai too much. However, since no one had died and no one had been injured, Kang Zhon was willing to listen to his explanation. Moreover, the current situation wasn't optimistic. If they really allowed young Kai to escape, they wouldn't be able to explain it to young Zhao. Their status wasn't as good as Yi Xinru's, so if they were to do this, their status would likely be even lower in the future. Chapter 512. Nothing. Facing Kang Zhon's question, Nan Sheng smiled coldly, "I just want to say that as long as we have a bargaining chip in hand, even if the 4 seniors fail, we can still occupy the dominant position. Whether young Kai will surrender because of them, I don't know, but it's unlikely, but we can still retreat. Young Master Kang has also seen the power of that mysterious grade artifact of his. If he is determined to kill us here, who can stop him?" Kang Zhon's expression changed as he carefully considered Nan Sheng's words and couldn't help feeling that what he said made sense. It was obvious that young Kai really cared about these people from High Heaven Pavilion, otherwise, he wouldn't have negotiated with Kang Zhon. With his temperament, if anyone dared to stand in his way, Kang Zhon was certain he wouldn't hesitate to attack. Using these people as bargaining chips to force young Kai to submit. Even if that didn't work, they could still retreat calmly. Young Master Kang shouldn't still be worried about your verbal agreement with young Kai, right? Nan Sheng saw his hesitation and sneered. Kang Zhon's expression became ugly, but he didn't deny it. Although the agreement just now was only a verbal one, for a young lord like Kang Zhon, he still cared about his promises. Since he had agreed with young Kai not to move against these people from High Heaven Pavilion, if he went back on his word, it would be inappropriate. Young Master Kang, do you really want to see young Kai use that artifact to kill all of us here? Nan Sheng struck while the iron was hot and continued to persuade him. Seong Chu, who had not spoken until now, also spoke up, "Young Master Kang, please reconsider. Perhaps you think we are doing this to avenge a personal grudge. I won't deny that I hate young Kai to the extreme, but Big Brother Nan and I are also thinking about everyone here." Taking a deep breath, Kang Zhon's hesitation turned into determination, nodding, "Fine, let's do as you say." He was really afraid of young Kai and didn't have any expectations for these 4 immortal Ascension Boundary Masters. Nan Sheng and Seong Chu heard this and were overjoyed. Since participating in the Inheritance War until now, they had finally seized an opportunity to retaliate against young Kai. Naturally, they were quite happy. "Don't be too ruthless, just capture 2 people." Kang Zhon frowned and ordered. "All right." Nan Sheng nodded and grinned, his eyes sweeping over the High Heaven Pavilion disciples. Reaching out, he pointed at a High Heaven Pavilion disciple and immediately had someone rush in to grab him. That martial uncle didn't resist, and even stopped the younger generation of disciples from stirring. He slowly shook his head at the crowd. Right now, the enemy was strong and they were weak. If they really fought, it wouldn't be strange for them to be completely wiped out here. It would be better to endure for a while. Seeing that the High Heaven Pavilion members didn't resist, Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu couldn't help showing a look of disappointment and disdain. Coward. Kang Zhon's brow furrowed. He didn't like the way they were trying to provoke High Heaven Pavilion, but he didn't say anything. Nan Sheng's eyes continued to wander through the crowd, looking for a suitable target. Suddenly, he felt a ruthless gaze directed towards him. He couldn't help but sneer as he pointed at that person and said, "Capture him too." As soon as these words were spoken, the Nan family's masters captured the High Heaven Pavilion disciple. This person didn't look very old, even younger than Yang Kai, and his strength wasn't very high, only Yuan Qi boundary 5th stage. Obviously, his aptitude wasn't bad. It was because of this that Nan Sheng had chosen him. The 2 High Heaven Pavilion disciples, one old and one young, were captured and brought before Nan Sheng. The older generation disciple's expression was calm, neither servile nor overbearing, while the younger disciple simply sneered and stared at Nan Sheng stubbornly and proudly. "Your eyes aren't bad." Nan Sheng nodded, suddenly swinging his hand and slapping out. With a loud bang, the young disciple's face was painted with a 5-finger mark and one of his teeth was knocked out. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth as his head was slapped to the side. Turning his head, he still stared at Nan Sheng with that same ruthless gaze, not saying a word. The veins on Nan Sheng's forehead throbbed. He had never expected this person to be so stubborn. Feeling annoyed, he sent out another slap and sneered, "Ignorant fool." After the 2 slaps, the young disciple's cheeks were swollen and his mouth was full of dirty blood. However, the look in his eyes did not change at all. He did not even show any fear. There was only a kind of determination that could be killed but not humiliated. Kang Zhon couldn't help but be slightly moved, seemingly surprised by the performance of this High Heaven Pavilion disciple. "What's your name?" Kang Zhon asked. The young disciple glanced at him faintly and proudly said, "Sassafras." "Sassafras." Kang Zhon took a deep breath and murmured, nodding, "High Heaven Pavilion really is extraordinary. If an ordinary young disciple had such courage, what about the others? These people, even if they were killed, would they surrender and beg for mercy?" Kang Zhon didn't know why, but he was certain of this. Sassafras sneered, "You can only act ruthlessly in front of me. When my brother Yang comes out, you'll show him what you've got." Kang Zhon's face went black. Just as Sassafras said, he really didn't dare act ruthlessly in front of Yang Kai. Nan Sheng became even angrier and kicked Sassafras's knee. Sassafras didn't resist and knelt to the ground. The next moment, Nan Sheng sent out a flurry of slaps. Kang Zhon didn't even have time to stop before Sassafras was slapped a dozen more times. The sound of these slaps was extremely harsh. No one from High Heaven Pavilion moved, only the sound of their breathing gradually becoming heavier. Everyone's eyes were red as they stared at Nan Sheng like man-eating beasts. The silent and calm atmosphere was like the calm before a storm, causing Kang Zhon to shudder and quickly shout, "Enough." Nan Sheng stopped and took a deep breath before reaching out and pinching Sassafras's mouth, pulling out a sword from one of the men beside him and placing it across Sassafras's neck, coldly saying, "You think I don't dare kill you? You don't have the guts." Sassafras's mouth was covered in blood, but he still sneered, as if he had lived long enough. Nan Sheng's expression suddenly changed, and it was particularly interesting. He looked hesitant and struggled. He slowly increased the strength of the sword in his hand and drew a red line of blood on Sumu's neck, but he still didn't have the courage to directly cut it. Killing Sassafras wouldn't take much effort. But if Yang Kai were to retaliate, Nan Sheng would have to consider whether he could afford it. On the other hand, Sassafras looked calm, without the slightest fear. He was certain that Nan Sheng was afraid of Yang Kai. "Let him go." Kang Zhon took a deep breath and slowly shook his head. Nan Sheng looked ruthless, but in reality, he was nothing more than a pushover who only knew how to squeeze a soft persimmon. Nan Sheng clenched his fists and ground his teeth. He wanted to kill this reckless person who dared to provoke him, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. Kang Zhon's words suddenly made him feel like he was riding a tiger. Letting him go was tantamount to admitting that he didn't have the courage. As the young lord of a first-class family, how could Nan Sheng afford to lose face like this? His expression becoming fierce, Nan Sheng swung his sword in an arc. Puff blood splashed out. The right side of Sassafras's chest was pierced through by the sword. Nan Sheng's expression was fierce as he threw Sassafras to the ground. The High Heaven Pavilion disciples were shocked and quickly rushed forward to help him up. You really think I don't dare to touch you? Nan Sheng spat, his face twitching. You bastard. Kang Zhon was also stunned, roaring angrily as he kicked Nan Sheng's body, causing him to stagger. When Nan Sheng hit Sassafras just now, he hadn't tried to stop him. After all, it was just a superficial wound, so even if he was beaten miserably, it wouldn't hurt his muscles or bones. After a few days of rest, he would be fine. In Yang Kai's eyes, this sword strike was enough to kill him. However, it was also obvious that Nan Sheng had hesitated when he attacked. He had chosen to stab Sassafras in the right side of his chest. If it had been the left side where his heart was, Sassafras would have immediately died. Shouts and curses came from the mouths of the High Heaven Pavilion disciples, many of them frantically attacking the Xiong and Nan family cultivator. Don't resist. Kang Zhon roared at the Xiong and Nan family cultivator, rushing forward, taking out a jade bottle from his sleeve, shaking his hand as he poured out a pill and stuffed it directly into Sassafras's bloody mouth. During this time, Kang Zhon was also attacked a few times by the High Heaven Pavilion disciples, but fortunately, he was wearing a defensive artifact armor so he wasn't injured. Perceiving his intentions, the people gathered around Sassafras didn't embarrass him anymore, several of his martial uncles even hurriedly helping Sassafras neutralize the effects of the pill. Hua. A crisp sound suddenly came from not far away. Kang Zhon turned his head to look and saw the barrier created by the mysterious grade mid-rank artifact shatter and disappear with a bang. The snow and wind that had filled the sky also disappeared. At the center of the barrier, Yang Kai and the woman from before appeared in front of everyone's eyes, wrapped in a cold wind. Near them, there were 4 things that looked like ice sculptures. They were arranged in all kinds of strange poses and stood there quietly. These were the 4 masters belonging to the Kang and Chiu families. From the stiff expressions on the faces of the 4 ice sculptures, it was easy to see just how shocked they were before they were frozen. Kang Zhon couldn't help feeling his scalp go numb and the soles of his feet cramp. Although he had faintly felt that these 4 immortal Ascension Boundary Masters wouldn't be able to capture Yang Kai, he hadn't expected such a result. When the cultivator gathered around the barrier saw the figures of Yang Kai and Su Yang, all of them retreated, their faces filled with horror and fear. Among them, there weren't many masters left, and even if there were some immortal Ascension Boundary Masters, they were only at the 4th or 5th stage. The masters from the 8 great families had all been frozen into ice sculptures, so how could they dare think of resisting? Chiozi Ruo, who was the leader of this group, went pale, his lips trembling as a sense of horror filled his heart. Yang Kai glanced over at him and said lightly, "They won't die, but if they want to come out, it will take them at least half a day." Chiozi Ruo nodded unconsciously and forced a smile. "Many thanks for 9th Young Lord's mercy." Yang Kai nodded lightly and didn't say anything more. After all, these 4 people were from the central capital's 8 great families. If he wanted to teach them a lesson, injuring them would be fine, even seriously injuring or crippling them would be fine, but he couldn't kill them. Sometimes, when it was necessary to show mercy, it was precisely because of this that Yang Kai had asked Su Yang to spare their lives. He believed that even if they managed to break out of the ice sculptures, it would still take them at least 1 to 2 months to recover. Chapter 513. Looking around, Yang Kai immediately noticed the commotion in High Heaven Pavilion's camp. Although he didn't know what was going on, he realized that something was wrong and his expression couldn't help sinking. "Senior brother Yang, senior sister Su." Li Yuntian cried out in a heart-wrenching manner, "Young Master Su. Young Master Su has been stabbed." Su Yang's beautiful face suddenly lost all color, her white figure transforming into a stream of light as she rushed into the crowd, Yang Kai following closely behind. Looking around, Yang Kai couldn't help narrowing his eyes as his face paled. In the crowd, Su Mu looked pale and sat cross-legged on the ground. There was a sharp sword in the right side of his chest, which came out of his body. Blood was foaming from his mouth and nose. His chi and blood were weak, and he gasped for breath, like the old bellows in the blacksmith's shop. A High Heaven Pavilion martial uncle was standing behind him, his hand pressed against his back as he poured yuan qi into his body. Su Yang's eyes suddenly turned red. She and Sassafras had a sibling relationship. Seeing her little brother in such a miserable state, how could she not feel distressed? Yang Kai pushed through the crowd and quickly stepped forward, reaching out and placing his hand on Sassafras' wrist, examining it for a moment before opening Sassafras' mouth and pouring some myriad drug milk into it. Once the myriad drug milk entered his mouth, Yang Kai reached out and pulled out the sword from Sassafras' right chest, causing blood to spurt out. Pouring out a few strands of yuan qi to seal the flow of blood from Sassafras' wound, Yang Kai comforted Su Yang, "It's all right now." Su Yang nodded gently. With the myriad drug milk, Sassafras really wouldn't have to worry about his life and might even have gained some benefits from this disaster and improved his strength a little. But, if he and Su Yang hadn't come out in time, half an hour later, it would have been difficult to say what would have happened to Sassafras. Even if he didn't die, he would likely be permanently disabled. Slowly standing up, Yang Kai's expression was calm as he turned around and looked at Kang Zhon, who was standing nearby. Kang Zhon suddenly felt his lips go dry. Yang Kai's silence made him feel at a loss for what to do, suddenly realizing that this was not good. "Who did it?" Yang Kai stared at Kang Zhon and asked softly. Kang Zhon gulped and hesitated. "Ninth young lord, this was just an accident. Who did this?" Kang Zhon frowned. Although he was well aware of Yang Kai's tyrannical strength, he was the one in charge of this operation and was also a young lord of the central capital. Naturally, he wouldn't act too timidly, quickly saying, "Ninth young lord, this is the inheritance war, 1 or 2 deaths are normal. You and I are enemies. Not to mention that this friend's life isn't in danger now, even if he really died, it wouldn't matter. How many people have died at Ninth young master's hands?" "Indeed, there are quite a few." Yang Kai nodded. "I did kill a lot of people. If their friends and family want revenge, they can come to me. Now that someone has hurt one of my people, I want to take revenge, so I want to know who did it." Kang Zhon was suddenly at a loss for words. Yes, if there was resentment, if there was hatred, if there was hatred, if there was hatred, then there was no need to stop others from taking revenge. What's more, the two of them had agreed before that High Heaven Pavilion's people would not intervene in this battle. Under this premise, if High Heaven Pavilion's people were seriously injured, Kang Zhon really couldn't claim any responsibility. But if he had to betray his own people, Kang Zhon couldn't do it. Doing so would only make him seem too spineless and afraid of Yang Kai. "It's that guy." Li Yuntian suddenly stood up in indignation, pointing to the side and shouting, "2 groups of people just came from that direction. It was that guy who wanted to kill young Master Su." Following the direction of his finger, Yang Kai's eyes landed on Nan Sheng not far away. Kang Zhon's brow furrowed as he suddenly discovered that Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu had at some point slipped away and returned to their camp. He had stayed here to clean up their mess, yet they had slipped away without a word, causing Kang Zhon to feel extremely annoyed. "I know." Yang Kai nodded lightly, glancing over at Kang Zhon and saying, "Young Master Kang, I already said that not allowing High Heaven Pavilion's people to participate in this battle was for your own good. If they were injured, I really would have killed them all. It seems you don't believe me." Kang Zhon was startled, but soon his eyes filled with horror. He found that Yang Kai's aura had suddenly become violent and bloody, and a thick murderous aura soared to the sky. Subconsciously, Kang Zhon hurriedly retreated. Yang Kai stared at him coldly, waving his hand and pulling out the sword he had taken from Sassafras's right chest. Wrapped in a cold light, he thrust it towards Kang Zhon. Kang Zhon's expression changed greatly. He hadn't expected Yang Kai to suddenly kill him, hurriedly using his martial skill to resist, but the destructive power contained in this sword was not something a cultivator of his level could block. *PU*. Kang Zhon groaned as the sword pierced through the right side of his chest, just like what had happened to Sassafras a moment ago. Under the huge force, he was forced back a dozen steps before he was able to stabilize his footing. His eyes trembling, Kang Zhon stared at Yang Kai in disbelief. Everyone was silent, their faces filled with horror. From the beginning of the Inheritance War until now, A young lord from the central capital's 8 great families had finally been injured, and seriously injured at that. When the young lords and young ladies from the 8 great families participated in the inheritance war, it was generally impossible for them to be injured, let alone risk their lives. No one dared to kill them, at most they would be defeated and forced to retreat. But now, this precedent, which had been maintained for countless years, had been broken. Kang Zhon stared down at the long sword piercing his chest, the stinging pain gradually spreading. Even now, he still couldn't believe that Yang Kai's courage was so great, to the point where he could defy the laws of heaven. "Ninth young lord," Kang Zhon muttered, his mouth filled with the taste of blood, his breathing becoming quite labored. Yang Kai glanced over at him coldly. "If you weren't from the 8 great families, today you would have died." Kang Zhon's face twitched as a chill spread across his heart. Not daring to fight back, he quickly sat down cross-legged on the ground, took out a pill, and swallowed it. The wind howled as Yang Kai stepped forward, as if a mountain of blood was pressing down on them. Everyone felt the aura of death wash over them. Of Yang Zhao's group, besides Kang Zhon, who was still circulating his secret art to heal himself, the 4 immortal ascension boundary 5th stage masters from the 8 great families who had been frozen into ice sculptures, and the dozen or so masters who were being held back by Yingju, the rest had all gathered together at this moment. Led by Qiuzi Ruo, all of them looked over in horror. "What do we do? What do we do?" Qiuzi Ruo's face went pale as he constantly asked the people around him. This time's operation should have been commanded by Kang Zhon, but now that he couldn't even protect himself, this heavy responsibility naturally fell to Qiuzi Ruo. Facing such a strong opponent, even daring to seriously injure Kang Zhon, Yang Kai, Qiuzi Ruo didn't have the courage to resist. He was afraid he would end up in the same situation as Kang Zhon. If he didn't have an idea, how could anyone else? "Nan Sheng, this is all your fault. Tell me, what do we do now?" Qiuzi Ruo turned to Nan Sheng and roared. Nan Sheng's previous arrogance and domineering attitude had long since disappeared. Hearing this, he couldn't help feeling a little dazed, pursing his dry lips, not saying a word. Xiongchu's eyes flashed a trace of contempt and ruthlessness as he said, "Young Lord Qiu, no matter how strong Yang Kai is, he's still just one person. What is there to be afraid of? Besides, young Lord Kang also said that this is the inheritance war. 1 or 2 people dying is nothing, not to mention that 1 person is still alive. Yang Kai is clearly making a mountain out of a molehill. Even if news of this spread back to the central capital, he won't be able to hold his ground. Now is a good opportunity to eliminate Yang Kai. Young Lord Qiu should seize it. We are willing to follow your orders." "Bullshit." Qiuzi Ruo roared. "Yang Kai and young Lord Kang already made an agreement, yet you insisted on provoking High Heaven Pavilion's people. Moreover, Yang Kai showed mercy to our people just now, but you, fuck your 18 generations of ancestors." Xiongchu's face went black as he suddenly felt extremely disappointed with Qiuzi Ruo's cowardice. As they spoke, Yang Kai had already arrived 20 meters in front of the crowd. Facing the 7 forces alone, he wasn't afraid at all. Although the top masters of these forces had all been restrained, there were still a number of them, including a few immortal ascension boundary masters. "Qiuzi Ruo!" Yang Kai shouted, "You're Qiu Yimeng's little brother. I don't want to embarrass you, so scram to the side." Qiuzi Ruo's face suddenly showed a hint of joy, but just as he was about to open his mouth to agree, he suddenly shook his head and said, "Ninth young lord, this Qiu is unable to comply with this request." Yang Kai nodded. "At least you have some backbone." All of a sudden, light flashed from his hand, and a bone shield appeared in his grasp. "It's that mysterious grade artifact." Qiuzi Ruo and the others' expressions changed slightly. This bone shield had been used by Yang Kai when he attacked Yang Kai's compound and just now, so everyone naturally knew how powerful its defensive power was and how it could absorb energy attacks. With this bone shield in hand, Yang Kai's defense could be said to be impregnable. But at this moment, when Yang Kai took it out, everyone was somewhat confused, secretly wondering if Yang Kai was going to defend himself. But before they could finish their thoughts, a dangerous aura suddenly filled the air. On the bone shield, black lightning flashed, and in the center of the bone shield, a violent energy burst out from the beast's maw. ********************************************** A series of lightning dragons the size of human legs suddenly burst out from the bone shield's maw, each one swaying back and forth, each of them more than 100 meters long, exuding a heaven-destroying momentum as they rushed towards the seven forces. How is this possible? Qiu Ruo exclaimed in shock. There were many types of artifacts, some defensive, some offensive, and some auxiliary. The bone shield in Yang Kai's hand was clearly a defensive artifact, so how could it have become an offensive one? Furthermore, he seemed to have heard of this lightning dragon somewhere before. This is the power of Yang Kang's mysterious grade artifact. Xiong Chu screamed, suddenly realizing that the bone shield in Yang Kai's hand could not only absorb energy attacks but also reflect them back. These lightning dragons were clearly the power of the mysterious grade artifact that Yang Kang had displayed when he had fought Yang Kai more than 2 months ago. At that time, these lightning dragons were swallowed by Yang Kai's bone shield and were only released by Yang Kai 2 months later. Chapter 514. Who could resist the power of a mysterious grade artifact? Unless it was also a mysterious grade defensive artifact, like the bone shield in Yang Kai's hand. When the 7 or 8 lightning dragons rushed out from the beast's mouth in the center of the bone shield, everyone was dumbfounded. Their faces were instantly filled with horror and fear. The call of death rang in their ears, and no one could remain calm. If there were still masters here, they could have relied on their heaven-defying methods to block the lightning dragons, but with so many of them trapped or frozen, the rest of them were powerless to resist. Everyone was thrown off their feet, all of them panicked and fled in all directions, trying to escape from the lightning dragon's onslaught. Xiong Chu's mind was still clear, shouting for everyone to work together to resist, but this chaotic scene made him feel powerless. Even Qiu Ruo had run away. How could anyone else stay in place and wait for death? Hong hong hong, catcher. Those lightning dragons were like invincible sharp swords, wrapped in unparalleled power, wreaking havoc in the crowd. Those who were touched by the lightning dragons all convulsed and fell to the ground, unable to get up. There were even some who were directly electrocuted to the point that their entire body was charred. The remaining Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters all protected their own young lords as they tried to avoid the lightning dragon's attack, like stray dogs that had lost their homes. Screams rang out one after another. In front of the power of a mysterious grade artifact, human life was as cheap as grass. Kang Zhon, who had been circulating his secret art to heal himself, slowly opened his eyes and stared at the miserable scene before him, his heart going cold. Only now did he realize that what Yang Kai had said before was true. Him not allowing High Heaven Pavilion's people to participate in this battle was really out of consideration for them. Nan Sheng had only injured one of High Heaven Pavilion's young disciples, yet he had provoked such a slaughter. If High Heaven Pavilion's people really suffered heavy casualties because of this melee, then, would he still be able to return to War City alive? Kang Zhon didn't dare to think about it anymore, closing his eyes in defeat, no longer paying attention to the battle. All of High Heaven Pavilion's people suddenly became excited, each of their faces flushed red as they clenched their fists. The humiliation and forbearance that he had just endured seemed to have all been found at this moment. Yang Kai had single-handedly thrown the 7 families' cultivator into chaos. Those people could only dodge, and they couldn't even find the time to attack. Streaks of purple light suddenly exploded in midair, spreading out ripples visible to the naked eye. Like pebbles thrown into a calm lake, the ripples enveloped the cultivator who was dodging the lightning dragon's attacks. And within those layers of ripples, there was a crazy, destructive, and brutal divine sense attack. Divine soul skill. Yang Kai unleashed his soul skill almost without restraint. Wherever the consciousness spread out, most of the cultivator's expression suddenly became sluggish. Their faces were filled with pain as if some evil had invaded their minds. They stood there in a daze, not knowing if they were dead or alive. The lightning dragon that followed turned them into charcoal. Only the Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters were able to slightly resist the attack of this soul skill, but they still wore a pained expression. A charred smell that made one want to vomit filled the entire area. After a while, the lightning dragon gradually disappeared into the air. The power of the mysterious grade artifact had finally been fully exerted, and Yang Kai no longer released his soul skill. In the wilderness, screams filled the air as countless people died. The Seven Forces originally had nearly 300 cultivators, but at this moment, only 200 remained. Corpses littered the wilderness, all of them black as charcoal. Plumes of smoke rose from these corpses, rising into the air like smoke from a kitchen chimney. At some point, Chozi Ruo had fallen to the ground, his eyes blank, his 2 rows of teeth chattering fiercely. Escaping from death, his mood was very complicated. Compared to the others, he could be said to be unscathed. When he participated in the Inheritance War, he was fearless and didn't think he would encounter any life-threatening danger. But today, he didn't dare to think so. He didn't know if it was because Yang Kai was worried about Qiu Yimeng showing mercy to him, or if it was because of his good luck that he didn't encounter the lightning dragon, but Yang Kai's slaughter this time really frightened him. Deep in his heart, a huge shadow loomed over him, as if it was grinning at him, wanting to take his life. Young Lord Qiu, run! An immortal ascension boundary master from an unknown force saw Chozi Ruo lose his wits and quickly rushed to his side, helping him up and flying towards War City without looking back. Facing a man who even dared to severely injure Kang Zhon, Chozi Ruo couldn't muster up any fighting spirit. Now he just wanted to run as far away as possible. Most people thought so and quickly got up and fled, no longer caring about anything else. What are you running for? Xiongchu roared. He can't use his artifact anymore. After using that kind of attack, he should be at his weakest. We should capture him in one fell swoop. Young Lord Qiu, where is young Lord Qiu? No one paid attention to his shouts. Not to mention that Xiongchu didn't have the qualifications to issue orders. Even if he did, these people wouldn't be willing to stay in this purgatory any longer. Just as he was shouting, Xiongchu suddenly felt a sharp gaze land on him. Looking over, Xiongchu's eyes met Yang Kai's cold gaze. Feeling his heart clench, Xiongchu couldn't help retreating a few steps. Brother Xiong, let's go, we can't do anything about this. Nansheng rushed up and pulled him back. Xiongchu grit his teeth and shot a vicious and resentful glare towards Yang Kai before stomping his foot and shouting, let's go. A bunch of cowards. Joining forces with such a group of people, how could he possibly achieve anything great? Xiongchu was extremely depressed, imagining that if he hadn't offended Yang Kai that day at the foot of Taifang Mountain, or if Yang Kai had accepted his goodwill, would he have been able to achieve something great by following him today? However, there was no turning back in this world. Xiongchu could only hate himself for being so blind that he had actually offended such a person. The 7 forces had either fled or died, and in the blink of an eye, not a single one remained. Do you think I'll let you go? Yang Kai's voice suddenly reached everyone's ears. Although his voice wasn't loud, it was extremely clear, causing everyone to feel as if they had been plunged into an ice cellar. Nansheng and Xiongchu glanced back as they fled and saw that Yang Kai was still standing quietly in place, not chasing after them. Both of them couldn't help breathing a sigh of relief, thinking that he was just trying to scare them. Their speed became even faster. All they wanted to do was return to War City and hide in Yang Kai's compound. Once Yang Kai's anger subsided, they could ask Yang Zhao to come forward and mediate. Yang Kai's blood and qi surged, clearly showing the restlessness in his heart. Turning his eyes to the still unconscious Sassafras and the red-eyed Su Yang, he said, wait for half a day before you set off, by that time Sassafras should be fine. Su Yang was startled and quickly looked up. What about you? Daring to touch my sect's people, you must pay the price. After saying this sentence, Yang Kai's figure flashed like a bolt of lightning, his murderous intent filling the air. Of the 7 forces, the surviving cultivator was desperately trying to escape, only gradually relaxing when they were 100 kilometers away. When they looked back and didn't see any pursuers, they couldn't help breathing a sigh of relief. Recalling what had just happened, everyone couldn't help shuddering as they rejoiced at the thought of surviving a calamity. Turning their heads and looking around, there were only 20 or so people gathered together while the rest had long since fled. It should be fine, right? Someone asked in horror while the others remained silent, gasping for breath. That 9th young lord simply doesn't take human lives seriously. This sentence was immediately met with agreement from everyone. And that Nansheng and Bai Chu, If it weren't for those two idiots, how could we have ended up in such a sorry state? What did you say? Suddenly, someone stood up angrily. My young Master Nan was only thinking about the overall situation. Who do you think you are? You dare insult young Master Nan? Am I wrong? Thinking about the overall situation? What a joke. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu were clearly venting their anger on that group of people. Do you really think we don't know that your Nan family and Xiong family once suffered a loss at the hands of the ninth young lord and participated in the inheritance war this time just to get back at him? Bullshit. I'm just telling the truth. Who do you think your Xiong and Nan families are, actually daring to challenge the Yang family's young lord? Even if the second young lord really won the inheritance war, so what? What can Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng do to Yang Kai? At most, they can only vent their anger. Are you from the Nan family? As the two were arguing, a low voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. The cultivator who defended Nan Sheng raised his head proudly and said, "So what if I am?" But before he could finish his words, a blood-red petal suddenly pierced through his head, causing the man's eyes to bulge and his face to turn white. The moment his consciousness blurred, a figure that terrified him appeared in front of him. Ninth young lord. After seeing the face of the person who had killed the Nan family cultivator, everyone paled and quickly stood up, staring towards Yang Kai in horror. None of them had expected that Yang Kai would really catch up to them. Among these 20 or so people, only one had reached the immortal ascension boundary, and it was only an immortal ascension boundary third stage cultivator. Suddenly seeing Yang Kai appear here, the 20 or so people couldn't help moving closer to the immortal ascension boundary cultivator, seemingly trying to find a little sense of security. On the other hand, the immortal ascension boundary third stage cultivator couldn't help gulping. He was indeed an immortal ascension boundary master, but his combat strength wasn't high. Yang Kai could fight evenly with Liu Qingyao, so wouldn't it be easy for him to deal with him? He knew he definitely wasn't Liu Qingyao's opponent. However, what made him feel a little relieved was that after Yang Kai killed the Nan family cultivator, he didn't kill him again, instead staring at them and asking, "Who else is from the Nan family and Xiong family?" The 20 or so people looked at each other and suddenly realized what Yang Kai wanted to do. Every injustice had its perpetrator, every debt its debtor. The ninth young lord wanted to kill the Nan family and Xiong family. No one dared to answer. The more words they spoke, the more likely they were to slip up. No one knew what Yang Kai was thinking. Chapter 5:15. In the face of Yang Kai's questioning, no one dared to answer, only the sound of their hearts beating wildly. After waiting for a moment, Yang Kai lost his patience and coldly said, "If you don't speak, all of you will die. Speak and I'll spare your life. He's from the Xiong family." Immediately, someone couldn't bear such a huge pressure and pointed to a person beside him. The man couldn't help cursing and running away. A blood-red petal flew out from the corpse of the man who had just died and pierced through the back of the fleeing man's head. With a thud, the man fell to the ground and rolled a few times on the ground before he gradually stopped moving. "Is there anyone else?" Yang Kai asked again. Everyone kept shaking their heads, indicating that there was no one from the Bai and Nan families here. Yang Kai nodded lightly and no longer asked any questions, disappearing from everyone's sight in the next moment. Seeing that he kept his promise and really let them go, the remaining cultivators gasped for breath and fell to the ground weakly. Their bodies were covered in sweat, and when the breeze blew, they felt cold all over. "Don't let me see you in War City again." From a distance, Yang Kai's voice rang out. Everyone was startled again and quickly nodded, "Understood, understood." After this time, none of them dared to return to War City again. After experiencing what had just happened, none of them had the courage to continue to face this murderous Yang family young lord. If he alone could accomplish such a feat, what more with the many powerful helpers in his house? Originally, this group of people was quite optimistic about Yang Zhao, thinking that he would be able to rely on his numbers and strength to win the final victory in the inheritance war. They would also be able to follow behind Yang Zhao and drink the soup and meat. But now, no one dared to think so. A moment later, 50 kilometers away, Yang Kai once again killed 3 cultivator from the Xiong and Nan families, leaving behind a group of people who had just escaped with their lives. He wasn't the kind of person who would indiscriminately slaughter all living beings. He was a man who would be tough when he needed to be tough, and when he needed to be merciful, he would show mercy. Just like how he hadn't allowed Su Yang to kill the 4 immortal Ascension Boundary Masters from the Chiu family and Kang family, it was also because of the complex relationship between the 8 great families. But this time, he was really annoyed by Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng. These two had been enemies with him since the beginning of the Inheritance War. Whenever he had a dispute with them before, Yang Kai didn't care. Since they walked different paths, there was no common ground. Since they had participated in the Inheritance War, their relationship was naturally antagonistic. They killed their own people, and they killed their own people. It was only right and proper, but this time was different. These people were High Heaven Pavilion's last hope for revival. What's more, despite the agreement between him and Yang Zhon, Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu still dared to attack them. Of course, Yang Kai did not intend to go around the Xiong and Nan families. He wanted to let the world know that High Heaven Pavilion was indeed a tiger's ass that shouldn't be touched. All the people from the Xiong and Nan families were killed mercilessly. Everywhere they went, there was a trail of blood. After a day and a night, Yang Kai finally saw the figures of Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng in the distance. The two of them were desperately escaping with a group of people and hadn't stopped to rest all day, so at this moment, Yuan Qi couldn't help gasping for breath. They had thought they would be able to return to War City safely, so the reason they had run so fast was to prepare for the unexpected, but who knew that Yang Kai would really chase after them? When they felt the murderous intent behind them and the smell of blood, the group of people turned around in horror and suddenly panicked. "Ninth young lord is chasing after us." What? Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu both paled, quickly turning their heads to look back and really seeing Yang Kai's figure, like a meteor, closing the distance between them. Is he crazy? Nan Sheng was stunned, just for a single High Heaven Pavilion disciple. Xiong Chu's expression was gloomy, a deep sense of powerlessness and fear flashing across his face as he nodded gently. "I'm afraid we've really touched his defiant wail. Brother Xiong, what do we do now?" Nan Sheng was sweating profusely. "Hurry up and come up with an idea. Return to War City, there's no other way. As long as we can return to Second Young Lord's house, we'll be safe." Xiong Chu grit his teeth and sped up again. Nan Sheng cursed under his breath, thinking to himself that the most important thing right now was to find a way to escape from Yang Kai's pursuit. After a day and night of fleeing, his group of people was almost completely exhausted. Whether or not they could outrun Yang Kai was still unknown. Inferring from Yang Kai's speed, they didn't have much hope. Where did this bastard get so much Yuan Qi to squander? After chasing him for so long, he was still full of murderous intent, full of fighting spirit, and determined not to give up. With no time to complain, Nan Sheng quickly stuffed a few Yuan Qi replenishing pills into his mouth and also sped up. "You can't escape." Yang Kai's voice suddenly came from behind, causing everyone's hearts to clench. "None of you from the Xiong and Nan families will survive. Ninth young lord, we're not from the Xiong or Nan families." A young leader from one of the forces couldn't bear the pressure of Yang Kai's pursuit and quickly shouted. "Then kill the people from the Xiong and Nan families around you and I'll let you go." Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng's expressions changed, immediately turning vigilant towards the people around them, fearing that these people would turn on them. The people from the Xiong and Nan families added together numbered only about 70 people. First, they had been slaughtered by Yang Kai, and then they had scattered during their escape. Now, there were less than 20 people gathered around them while the people from the other forces outnumbered them by 2 to 3 times. If these people really listened to Yang Kai's words and decided to attack them, Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng both felt that they would be doomed. Fortunately, when these people heard Yang Kai's words, they only hesitated slightly. After all, they were on the same side as the Xiong and Nan families, so when Yang Kai suddenly said such words, they didn't dare to attack them. Seeing their hesitation, Xiong Chu hurriedly shouted, "Everyone, my Xiong and Nan families are both reputable families. If you really decide to attack us here, you should think about the consequences." Those hesitant people suddenly sobered up. If they were in a hostile relationship, No matter how they fought or killed each other, no one would say anything. But now that they were all under Yang Zhao's command, if word of this were to spread, their families would no longer be able to maintain a foothold in the future. Compared with their own lives, naturally the honor of their families was more important. What's more, whether or not Yang Kai would be able to catch up was another matter altogether. Even if he did, he would first attack the Xiong and Nan families, giving them a chance to escape. Young Master Nan, young Master Xiong, rest assured, we will never attack you. Someone immediately said. That would be for the best. Xiong Chu nodded slightly, feeling relieved. Behind them, Yang Kai seemed to have noticed the changes in their expressions and couldn't help coldly snorting. Since you're not willing to tear apart face with the Xiong and Nan families, I won't force you. As long as you can stop Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng for me, I won't bother you again, otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. The atmosphere that had just been harmonious and relaxed was once again warped by these words. Compared to the previous conditions, Kai Yang's conditions were much more attractive and feasible. If he only blocked Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu's path slightly and didn't kill them, they could accept it. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu both realized that the situation was not good and quickly led their people away from the cultivator. Nan Sheng was even angrier and roared, Yang Kai, do you really think you're so great? If it weren't for your identity, how could this young master allow himself to be chased by you? Yang Kai sneered, I've already experienced this in Taifang Mountain. Your Xiong and Nan families only know how to bully the weak. Don't you like to divide people into 3, 6, and 9 classes? Under Taifang Mountain, you were so arrogant and despotic, taking people's lives as you please, but now, facing a young lord from a superfamily, you only have the courage to run away. Yang Kai's cold sarcasm rendered Nan Sheng speechless. At the foot of Taifang Mountain, he was really too arrogant and despotic. He bullied Kai Yang, Stormhouse and Blood Battle Gang, and even forced the Hu sisters. His face was extremely ugly. Fortunately, Tu Feng and Tang Yuxian had come to find him at that time and revealed Yang Kai's true identity, immediately silencing him and Xiong Chu. Otherwise, after that battle, Blood Battle Gang and Storm Hall would have suffered heavy casualties, and even if Yang Kai could escape, he would have had to pay a heavy price. Old and new grievances, it was time to settle. Yang Kai didn't have the patience to continue entangling with these two people he didn't put in his eyes. Not good, 9th young lord is catching up. Someone exclaimed. Many cultivator turned their heads to look and their expressions changed greatly. They found that while Yang Kai and Nan Sheng were talking, he had silently closed the distance between them. It was likely that he would really be able to catch up with them soon. Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng also panicked. Behind them, there was a surge of energy fluctuating. It seemed that Yang Kai was preparing some kind of killing move. This discovery made everyone more and more confused. The shocking blow released by the bone shield was still fresh in everyone's minds, so naturally, they were afraid he would use such a devastating attack again. Asterisk shua shua shua, asterisk the wind whistled behind them as sword chi filled the air. Tens of thousands of yuan chi sword chis lined up in rows, like a sky full of arrows, fiercely flying towards them. This overwhelming and indiscriminate attack immediately hindered everyone's escape. These cultivator were forced to turn around and use their martial skills and artifacts to resist the oncoming sword chi. After some resistance, a few more cultivator with inferior strength fell to the ground. Xiong Chu's expression became gloomy to the extreme, realizing that if they continued to flee like this, they wouldn't be able to escape Yang Kai's pursuit. Yang Kai's speed was much faster than his own. Elders, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to stop him for a while. His expression suddenly becoming firm, Xiong Chu turned to the several Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters around him and said. These people were the only remaining Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters from the Xiong and Nan families, the strongest among them only at the Immortal Ascension Boundary 4th stage. However, there were quite a few of them, 7 in total. Chapter 5:16. With these 7 Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters behind him, no matter how powerful Yang Kai was, it would be impossible for him to catch up. Moreover, War City was already in sight, only a few hundred kilometers away. Although Xiong Chu was helpless, He could only come up with this idea to delay Yang Kai's pace. When the 7 masters heard Xiong Chu's words, all of them wore bitter expressions, but they quickly regained their composure and nodded. "Young lord can rest assured, even if we have to risk our lives, we will stop him." Xiong Chu nodded firmly. "Good, everyone be careful, don't be careless." "Understood." Saying so, the 7 immortal ascension boundary masters from the Xiong and Nan families suddenly stopped, turned around, and stared behind them. Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng led the remaining group of people and continued to flee without looking back. Seeing the 7 masters stop, Yang Kai's expression became cold, sweeping the area in front of him with his divine sense, immediately understanding their cultivation and strength, causing a look of impatience to appear on his face. "Ninth young lord, if you want to catch up with our young master, you'll have to pass through this old master first," one of the 7 masters shouted. The 7 of them simultaneously circulated their Yuan Qi, releasing a burst of brilliance from their martial skills and artifacts as they fiercely attacked Yang Kai. They didn't intend to say anything to Yang Kai, but now that things had developed to this point, they could only wait and see. "Just with you lot." Yang Kai laughed wildly as the mysterious grade low-rank bone shield appeared in his hand, blocking in front of him as he rushed forward to meet the storm of attacks. Asterisk hong hong hong. Asterisk a series of loud bangs rang out as a violent wave of energy surged out. Every collision caused Yang Kai's pace to falter slightly, but the giant mouth in the middle of the bone shield swallowed up all of these energy waves. As this energy was swallowed up, the surface area of the bone shield also began to expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a round of attacks, Yang Kai remained unscathed, but his speed had been slowed down. Scatter. Knowing the mysteries of the bone shield, none of the 7 masters dared to remain in place, so with a shout, they scattered in all directions. The giant mouth on the bone shield suddenly emitted a burst of light as the incomparably sharp bone spikes sticking out of it began to clatter. Asterisk hua. Asterisk the energy that had just been swallowed up was all returned. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The bone spikes on the edge of the bone shield were also released, bringing out streaks of light as they attacked the 7 people. The 7 of them were already prepared, summoning defensive artifacts to protect themselves as they hurriedly dodged. After a series of clashes, the 7 of them avoided the attacks from the bone shields. They also used various methods to block the bone spikes. Although they were battered and exhausted, they were not injured. The bone shield was indeed powerful. Without an immortal ascension boundary 8th stage cultivator, it was impossible to break its defenses. However, if he specifically targeted the characteristics of the bone shield, it would be very difficult to make it play its role. After all, secret treasures were dead, while humans were alive. On top of that, these 7 people didn't have any intention of fighting against Yang Kai, they just wanted to delay him. As long as they could delay him for a cup of tea worth of time, with Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu's speed, they would be able to safely return to War City and return to Yang Kai's compound. Seeing their plan succeed, the 7 people's expressions became excited, suddenly realizing that Yang Kai wasn't as terrifying as they had imagined. Perhaps he was indeed invincible among cultivators in the same realm, even capable of fighting immortal ascension boundary masters, but he was only able to slaughter hundreds of people at once by relying on external forces. Once there was no external force to support him, no matter how powerful he was, there was a limit to his strength. Perhaps this time, not only would they be able to delay him, they could even take advantage of the fact that there was no master around to protect him and capture him. With this idea in mind, the 7 people became extremely excited, their originally somewhat lacking confidence instantly replaced by a high fighting spirit. Without any hesitation, a series of soul skills were launched towards Yang Kai, the spiritual energy from all directions intertwining and wrapping around Yang Kai like a spider web. Standing at the center of this gathering of spiritual energy, Yang Kai slowly shook his head, a look of disdain filling his face. Ever since he had refined the essence of the soul-type evil spirit in the evil cavern, the one thing he was least afraid of was divine sense attacks. In front of him, the 7 people's divine sense attacks were like a vast ocean compared to a stream, unable to shake him at all. On the contrary, Yang Kai's sudden burst of spiritual energy caused these people's knowledge seas to go cold, as if they were about to be frozen solid. Suddenly, all of them were horrified, wondering what kind of soul-type artifact Yang Kai had on him that allowed him to achieve such a feat. Xiongchu left you all behind just to be scapegoats, why bother trying so hard? Yang Kai shook his head, not wanting to be entangled with these people any longer. Even if he can escape back to War City, I will still take his life, all of you will only die a worthless death. The 7 people's faces sank, one of them quickly saying, Ninth young lord, there's no need to sow discord, we were born as members of the Xiong and Nan families, even if we die, we will still be ghosts of the Xiong and Nan families. Protecting the young lord's safety is our duty, since Ninth young lord is so confident, why not let us see your heaven-defying methods? Then I'll fulfill your wishes. Yang Kai nodded gently, his expression calming down, the bone shield in his hand disappearing as he slowly raised his right hand. As Yang Kai raised his hand, the 7 of them suddenly felt a sense of foreboding, as if everything in this world had suddenly come to a standstill. 7 pairs of eyes involuntarily bulged, filled with horror and fear as they stared at Yang Kai, wanting to attack but finding that no matter what they did, they couldn't move their hands or feet. In this world, the only one who could move was Yang Kai. The middle finger of his right hand touched his forehead, and a dreamlike whisper suddenly sounded. Become the demon race. The sky trembled and the earth buzzed, a kind of illusion that the heavens were falling apart appeared in everyone's hearts. A mass of darkness that seemed capable of swallowing all light and hope suddenly burst out from Yang Kai's body. This black energy was as dense as ink, and a bloodthirsty, brutal, and evil aura filled the air, causing the 7 people to involuntarily feel a trace of panic. As Yang Kai's aura grew, a deep sense of powerlessness filled each of their hearts. The power Yang Kai displayed had completely shocked them. The evil energy inside the unyielding golden skeleton had not been used for a long time. Yang Kai was also concerned about the irreconcilable relationship between the 8 great families and the ash-grey cloud evil land, so he had not shown his evil side. But now, in order to kill Xiongchu and Nan Sheng, he no longer hesitated. The ink-black evil energy only appeared for a moment before it was suddenly swallowed up by Yang Kai's body. Looking around, Yang Kai was still the same Yang Kai, but the feeling he gave off to the 7 people was completely different from a moment ago. A moment ago, the 7 of them had been fantasizing about joining forces to capture Yang Kai and set up a meritorious service for Nan Sheng and Xiongchu, but now, none of them dared to think so. They didn't know why, but facing the current Yang Kai, the 7 of them couldn't help feeling like they had reached a dead end. The 7 people's eyes also seemed to be covered by dark clouds, swallowed by darkness, unable to see the slightest trace of light, unable to find their bearings. Facing this cold and cruel gaze, the 7 people couldn't help retreating a few steps in horror. Yang Kai raised his hand slightly and sent out a few small black streaks of energy towards one of the 7 people. The man's complexion changed greatly and he hurriedly dodged, but just as he was about to do so, his body shook violently and his exposed skin was instantly covered by the black chi, causing him to fall to the ground. With a single blow, an Immortal Ascension Boundary 3rd Stage cultivator had been killed without even being able to fight back. The remaining 6 people all paled and remained silent out of fear. They hadn't even seen how this man had been struck and hadn't expected Yang Kai to be so powerful at this moment. Back at Taifang Mountain, Yang Kai was able to kill 2 Immortal Ascension Boundary 2nd Stage Masters with just his Yuan Qi 5th Stage cultivation. Now that he was only 1 step away from breaking through to the Immortal Ascension Boundary, the strength he could display was naturally much greater than before. These Immortal Ascension Boundary 3rd or 4th Stage Masters were nothing in his eyes. Those who block my path, die. Yang Kai's low voice rang out, and the sky suddenly became dim as a black palm print, like a rolling cloud, slammed down towards the 6 people. It was like a giant hand that covered the sky, growing larger and larger as time passed, making them feel like they couldn't avoid it. The 6 people screamed in horror as they madly circulated their Yuan Qi, trying to escape, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't avoid this giant palm print. With a bang, the earth trembled. The black palm print slammed down, creating a deep crater in the ground as the sound of bones breaking rang out. The 6 people, some crawling backwards, all fell into the giant palm print. Although none of them died, the evil energy had eroded their souls and bodies, causing their consciousnesses to become blurred. With so many broken bones, it was likely they would never be able to recover in this lifetime. I already said you were scapegoats, yet you still refuse to realize your mistakes. Yang Kai shook his head. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu knew he could greatly improve their strength, but they didn't seem to have told anyone. If the 7 people who had stayed behind to intercept Yang Kai had known about this information, they would never have had any hope of capturing Yang Kai, nor would they have been beaten so miserably. Ignoring the life or death of these 6 people, Yang Kai glanced towards War City 100 kilometers away, coldly snorted, and chased after them. Even if Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng had really hidden in Yang Zhao's mansion, they would still die today. War City. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu both looked panicked as they rushed into the city with a group of cultivators. At first glance, the passers-by saw their distressed appearance and couldn't help feeling surprised, wondering who was chasing these 2 and why they had ended up in such a sorry state. All of them were sweating profusely, their yuan qi completely exhausted, yelling at the passers-by to get out of the way as they hurriedly rushed towards Yang Zhao's mansion. The news quickly spread to Yang Wei and Yang Kai's houses. Yang Wei's brow furrowed. He didn't know what was going on, but he realized that something big was about to happen. Immediately, he and the blood warriors who followed him quietly left the mansion and walked towards Yang Zhao's compound. In Yang Kai's mansion, when Qiu Yimeng learned of this news, her beautiful face couldn't help turning pale and quickly issued orders to all the forces in the mansion to prepare for Yang Kai's return. She wasn't sure what had happened to Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu, but she faintly felt that it had something to do with Yang Kai. Chapter 517. The cultivator from Yang Kai's mansion was about to set off under Qiu Yimeng's leadership when the old demon suddenly appeared beside Qiu Yimeng and frowned. No need to go out, young master seems to have returned. His back. Qiu Yimeng breathed a sigh of relief. When Yang Kai took Yingju out, she had been on tenterhooks, fearing that Yang Kai had encountered some kind of accident. Now that she heard the old demon say this, she couldn't help feeling relieved and hurriedly asked, "Where is he now?" The old demon's expression became cold as he secretly probed for a moment before replying, "His back, but he doesn't seem to have any intention of returning to the mansion. Instead, he's heading southeast." Southeast. Qiu Yimeng muttered, her expression suddenly changing. That's the location of Yang Zhao's mansion. Who provoked young master? He's very angry right now. The old demon took a deep breath. This old master must go and protect him. As soon as his voice fell, the old man transformed into a bloody light and disappeared. Qiu Yimeng's beautiful face suddenly went pale and she didn't dare to hesitate, hurriedly leading the masters from the mansion to rush out. At the same time, Meng Wu Ya, who was meditating in his room, slowly opened his eyes, his brow furrowed as he turned his gaze towards Yang Kai's location, muttering to himself, "What's wrong with that little bastard? Why is his evil qi so thick?" Muttering to himself, Meng Wu Ya quickly stood up, opened the door, and stared at the horizon. Up above, dark clouds covered the sky, blocking out the slightest bit of sunlight. It seemed that the entire War City had fallen into darkness, the rolling black clouds like ink-splashed cotton, weighing down on everyone's hearts. Sighing slightly, Meng Wu Ya took a few steps forward and flew a few thousand meters away. Back in the Seal Temple, the 8 above Immortal Ascension Boundary Masters sitting on the high platform also withdrew from the small world where their divine senses had merged. Glancing at each other, their seemingly turbid old eyes flashed with some surprise. Qiu Dao Ren hesitated for a moment before saying, "Brother Yang, that little brat of yours seems to be showing signs of becoming the demon race." Yang Li Ting's expression remained indifferent as he closed his eyes and said nothing. The fat elder laughed and said, "You don't care. If he continued like this, he might really become the demon race." Only then did Yang Li Ting open his eyes and say indifferently, "He has to walk his own path. This old master doesn't have the leisure to care about his life or death. What if he really has a change of heart and turns into a demon?" The Kang family's above Immortal Ascension Boundary elder frowned and asked. A young man with such a thick murderous aura around him would sooner or later be affected by it and fall into the demonic Tao, becoming a murderous maniac who didn't even recognize his own family. When the time comes, this old man will personally clean up the sect. Brother Kang need not worry about it, Yang Li Ting responded coldly. Hearing this, the other 7 no longer tried to dissuade him, all of them slowly shaking their heads, secretly feeling that although the Yang family was strong, it wouldn't last long. Their familial feelings were really too weak. If it was a young disciple of their family who was in such a situation, how could they sit still? He would have left the mountain long ago to capture him and properly train him to suppress the evil genes in his body. What's more, this little brat had outstanding talent and was very likely to be a rising star of the Yang family in the future, yet Yang Liting was actually willing to ignore him. The 7 grand elders really couldn't understand. However, this was someone else's family matter after all. They had all lived for many years and were naturally indifferent to this matter. If Yang Liting didn't care about it, they naturally wouldn't care either. In fact, they were actually quite happy to see this scene. The Yang family had occupied the top position in the central capital for a long time, and if it continued to develop like this, within 100 years, it would inevitably give way to one of the other 7 families. What was laughable was that while the 7 families could see this, the Yang family couldn't. Yang Zhao's mansion. Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu fled back to their room like stray dogs, their hasty cries alerting Yang Zhao who was lying on his bed. Quickly getting up, Yang Zhao glanced outside. Second young master, what's wrong? Yi Xinru wriggled her waist like a water snake, her snow-white skin exposed to the air, her 2 slender legs wrapped around Yang Zhao's waist, her eyes blurred as her face flushed red. Something's wrong, I seem to hear the voices of Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng. Yang Zhao frowned. Did they come back? Yi Xinru smiled like a blooming flower, adding a touch of charm to her face. They must have brought second young master good news. Yang Zhao chuckled, reaching out his hand and gently pinching Yi Xinru's plump breasts, causing them to ripple. This rough action caused Yi Xinru to grunt and stare towards him. That'd better be the case. Yang Zhao was also secretly looking forward to it. This time's operation could be said to have been carried out without anyone noticing. He also had great confidence in Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo, so these past few days he had been waiting for news and had not been in the mood to cultivate. Instead, he had spent this time with Yi Xinru, relieving the anxiety in his heart. Otherwise, with his sex life, it would have been impossible for him to indulge in such debauchery in broad daylight. Beauty was indeed attractive, but what he valued more was his own strength and the power he could grasp. As long as he could defeat Yang Kai in the inheritance war, his eldest brother Yongwei would no longer be a threat. When the time came, he could easily win the final victory of the inheritance war. Since it's good news, it won't be too late to wait and hear it later. Yi Xinru said sweetly, stretching out her jade arm and wrapping it around Yang Zhao's neck, pulling him down in an attempt to keep him here for a while. Don't make trouble, if it's really good news, I'll pamper you tonight. Yang Zhao's eyes flashed, not the slightest trace of obscenity, only endless expectation. Although Yi Xinru felt a little regretful and disappointed, she no longer insisted. To deal with a man like Yang Zhao, her body was only a small trick, not a decisive factor. Then this lady will help you get dressed. Yi Xinru sat up docilely and pulled out the clothes that had been piled up messily on the bed and helped Yang Zhao put them on. Just as she finished dressing, Yang Zhao's expression suddenly changed while Yi Xinru's movements also paused. Because both of them had heard Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng's desperate and panicked cries. Both of them immediately realized that something was wrong. If these two had really brought back the good news Yang Zhao was looking forward to, it would have been impossible for them to behave like this. Second young lord, second young lord. Outside the door, the sound of footsteps and Xiong Chu's and Nan Sheng's cries rang out. Yang Zhao's expression sank as he quickly stepped out, opened the door, and glanced at Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng. His face couldn't help becoming pale. The two of them were in an extremely sorry state, their bodies covered with scars, their faces pale, and the yuan qi flowing through their bodies was almost undetectable. They were like stray dogs that had been chased back home. Yi Xinru exclaimed and quickly hid herself on the bed, covering her tender white body with the bedding, so as not to let any light leak out. What happened? Yang Zhao took a deep breath, trying to calm his mood as he asked. Seeing the appearance and expression of these two, Yang Zhao also understood something, but he still couldn't believe his guess was correct. Second young master. Nan Sheng pursed his dry and pale lips. After calling out his name, he couldn't say anything else. Yang Zhao immediately turned his eyes to Xiong Chu, the latter's expression also flickering with shame and resentment. Did you fail? Yang Zhao asked coldly, a cold light flashing across his face. Nan Sheng remained silent, his face red. Xiong Chu had no choice but to bite the bullet and say, "Second young lord is disappointed." Yang Zhao couldn't help but stagger slightly as he stared at these two in disbelief. Although he had some faint speculations in his heart, when they were confirmed, Yang Zhao still couldn't believe it. He had dispatched so many people, a perfect lineup and impeccable strength. How could they still fail? Tell me the reason. Yang Zhao's expression suddenly became cold as he shouted. Ying Ju has reached the immortal ascension boundary 9th stage. Xiong Chu grit his teeth and replied. This was something no one had expected. Ying Ju, who had reached the immortal ascension boundary 8th stage, was already enough to give Yang Zhao a headache. He had even summoned 2 peak immortal ascension boundary masters to deal with him. How could he have known Ying Ju had broken through to the immortal ascension boundary 9th stage? An immortal ascension boundary 9th stage blood warrior was likely only a blood warrior or an above immortal ascension boundary master of the same level could deal with here. Hearing this explanation, Yang Zhao couldn't help feeling startled, his expression relaxing a little. This false information obviously accounted for most of the reason for the operation's failure. What else? Even if Ying Ju was an immortal ascension boundary 9th stage cultivator, you shouldn't have failed. The people I gave you were more than enough to restrain Ying Ju. Recovering from his shock, Yang Zhao asked coldly. Ying Ju was indeed restrained. Xiong Chu's expression was bitter as he recalled his previous encounter and couldn't help shuddering, but Yang Kai had 2 mysterious grade artifacts. Immediately, Xiong Chu briefly recounted his previous encounter. The more Yang Zhao listened, the colder his heart became, only now realizing how terrifying his 9th brother was. What about Kang Zhon and Qiu Ziruo? How come only the 2 of you came back? Yang Zhao suddenly recovered and asked. Young Master Kang, he was pierced through the right side of his chest by Yang Kai and was seriously injured. He should still be healing. What? Yang Zhao's eyes widened. Yi Xinru, who was lying on the bed, also called out in shock, covering her mouth with her hand as a strange light flashed across her eyes. Kang Zhon had been pierced through the right side of his chest by Yang Kai. This news was simply too shocking. Since ancient times, no young lord of the 8 great families had ever suffered such a serious injury while participating in the inheritance war. According to the ancient records, the young lords and young ladies had at most suffered some superficial wounds that would heal after a few days of rest. But this time, the future successor of the Kang family had actually been stabbed. This news dumbfounded Yang Zhao and Yi Xinru. They hadn't expected Yang Kai to be so bold. What about Qiu Ziruo? I don't know, we separated on the way back. I don't know where he is now. Good, good, good. Yang Zhao suddenly burst into laughter, his laughter like thunder, rolling across the room. Both Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng couldn't help feeling their cheeks burn, wishing they could find a hole to crawl into and hide. You're quite strong. You were actually beaten to such a state by my 9th brother. You really are all young lords from first-class families. Your skills are extraordinary. Usually you're all proud and arrogant, but now you're like stray dogs. You brought so many people with you, yet you couldn't even capture my 9th brother. What use do I have for you? Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng were scolded so harshly that they couldn't help feeling annoyed. Although they felt sullen in their hearts, they didn't dare to refute. Chapter 518. Just as Yang Zhao was reprimanding Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng, an angry roar suddenly rang out. Xiong Chu, Nan Sheng, your time of death has come. This voice wasn't loud, but it clearly reached everyone's ears. Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng, who were both filled with shame and anger, couldn't help panicking when they heard these words. Yang Zhao's expression suddenly became strange as he glared towards Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng, sneering, "What do you mean? Why is 9th brother here?" Nan Sheng closed his mouth, not daring to speak. Xiong Chu braced himself and said, Yang Kai seems to have chased us all the way here. Nonsense. Yang Zhao ground his teeth and roared, of course I know he chased us all the way here, but why is he doing this? Are you hiding something from me? When he was describing the battle with Yang Kai, Xiong Chu hadn't mentioned anything about High Heaven Pavilion because he was afraid Yang Zhao would think too much. But now, Yang Kai had arrived outside the mansion, so Xiong Chu suddenly understood that he couldn't hide anything. Speak, what did you do to provoke him and make him so angry? Yang Zhao took a deep breath and tried to calm his tone. It was High Heaven Pavilion's people. Big Brother Nan injured one of their disciples. High Heaven Pavilion? The sect ninth brother came from? Yang Zhao frowned and continued to ask, it's not that simple, is it? Second young master, please calm your anger. Xiong Chu frowned and helplessly explained the whole story. After listening, Yang Zhao nodded gently, opposing each other and resorting to any means necessary. What you did wasn't wrong. Xiong Chu was overjoyed when he heard this, thinking that Yang Zhao didn't want to hold them accountable, but just as his smile bloomed, Yang Zhao's expression became cold again as he glared at him and said, if you had the ability to withstand Ninth Brother's revenge, I would have clapped my hands in joy. But do you have the ability? If you don't have the ability, then why would you do such a stupid thing? I only want to say that you two idiots have been blinded by hatred. Xiong Chu kept quiet out of fear. Nan Sheng raised his head and said, regardless of whether we are right or wrong, Yang Kai is making such a ruckus outside the mansion right now. If second young master doesn't respond, I'm afraid the world will look down on you. Trying to go at me? Yang Zhao laughed. Nan Sheng, you really look down on this Yang Zhao too much. No wonder you and Xiong Chu suffered such a big loss at the hands of my ninth brother. Nan Sheng couldn't help but panic, his voice trembling as he said, this Nan didn't mean that, second young master, please forgive me. Glaring at him coldly, Yang Zhao said, but you're right, ninth brother daring to provoke me outside my house in broad daylight, I can't just ignore him. When Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng heard this, they couldn't help feeling overjoyed and quickly said, many thanks, second young lord. No need. Yang Zhao slowly shook his head and said flatly, this time I will protect you because you are still my allies. After today, all of you can return to your respective clans. War City does not need you, nor does the Yang family's inheritance war. With a cold snort, he turned around, picked up his clothes, and walked out. Behind him, Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu's faces were completely drained of blood. They hadn't expected that because of this incident, Yang Zhao would actually expel them. The Xiong and Nan families were quite powerful and had long since attached themselves to the great tree that was Yang Zhao in this inheritance war. For so long, they had braved wind and rain, experiencing all kinds of hardships, fighting side by side with Yang Zhao. For the sake of the inheritance war, the Xiong and Meng families had also invested a lot of manpower, material, financial, and so on. But now, at the end of the inheritance war, they were actually going to be expelled by the main family. If news of this spread out, the two families would definitely become laughingstocks. After paying so much, not receiving any benefits was only secondary, the family's honor would definitely be tarnished. After offending Yang Kai and failing to obtain his protection and favor, wanting to establish a relationship with the Yang family in the future would be somewhat unrealistic. The other great forces in the world may also alienate the Xiong and Nan families because of this incident. When that time came, the family's development would definitely be difficult. It was also very likely that because of this incident, the two of them would lose their positions as family heirs. Considering all this, Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng couldn't help shivering in cold sweat. Immediately, their eyes filled with hatred and resentment, both of them couldn't help grinding their teeth and clenching their fists. If it weren't for Yang Kai, how could they have fallen to such a state? Two young lords. A delicate voice suddenly called out from the side, causing the dazed Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng to look up and see Yi Xin-ru smiling charmingly, reaching out to cover her chest with a quilt, exposing her two delicate shoulders, giving off an alluring luster like that of porcelain. Normally, Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng would definitely have imprinted this beautiful scene into their eyes, but right now, they weren't in the mood to do so. Yi Xin-ru giggled, not caring about her exposed skin, reaching out and lifting the quilt, revealing the front of her chest, whispering softly, "You're standing here, it's not easy for me to get dressed, can you two step back for a moment? Also, second young lord has already left, don't you want to chase after him?" Seong Chu and Nan Sheng awoke from their stupor and quickly ran out. Although Yang Zhao had said that he would protect them this time, who knew if he was telling the truth? After the two left, Yi Shinru curled her lips and muttered discontentedly, "Why didn't you help me close the door?" Muttering to herself, her cheeks flushed red as she muttered to herself, "This Yang Kai is quite interesting, even daring to stab Kang Zhon, his courage is quite big." Although she had been in contact with Yang Kai several times, she had never spoken to this youngest Yang family young lord, so she didn't know what kind of temperament he had. But today, after experiencing it for herself, she couldn't help secretly paying attention, wondering who would win the inheritance war between him and second young lord Yang Zhao. Outside Yang Kai's house, Yang Kai stood alone, his demonic qi soaring to the heavens, his huge divine sense enveloping the entire compound, penetrating every nook and cranny. A steady stream of people rushed towards Yang Kai's house and slowly gathered. These people had all been attracted by Yang Kai's voice and none of them knew what was happening. Inside War City, a storm was brewing. A few thousand meters away, inside a tea house, Yong Wei, who had concealed his appearance, squinted towards Yang Kai from a few thousand meters away and couldn't help feeling surprised. He found that although Yang Kai seemed calm right now, in fact, his murderous intent had been locked onto a certain spot in Yang Zhao's house, and the look on his face was also extremely firm. It was as if he would never give up until he had killed his target. What does ninth brother want to do? Yong Wei was stunned. War City had been peaceful for more than 2 months now, and everyone had been working hard to develop and strengthen themselves in order to achieve the effect of suppressing the enemy. Ninth brother suddenly making such a move made Yong Wei quite confused. However, faintly, Yong Wei felt like he had missed a good show. There should be some kind of conflict between ninth brother and second brother that he wasn't aware of, otherwise, it would be impossible for him to make such a big fuss in broad daylight. At that moment, a blood-red light broke through the air, bringing with it an unparalleled demonic qi. Yang Wei's breath came to a halt as he stared towards this blood-red light. A moment later, the blood-red light fell beside Yang Kai. It was the evil demon master who had suddenly appeared in Yang Kai's house 2 months ago. Young master. As soon as the old demon appeared, he stood not far from Yang Kai, vigilant of the surrounding movements. Yang Kai nodded gently, already knowing that this old man would come, so he didn't show much interest. Where did this person come from? Yong Wei thought bitterly, really unable to figure out the origins of this old demon. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Yong Wei saw a familiar figure calmly sit down in the chair across from him. Turning his head, Yong Wei found that it was actually Liu Qingyaro of the Liu family. Yong Wei nodded slightly and raised his hand to pour him a cup of tea. "No one knows where that person came from," Liu Qingyaro suddenly said. "This person seems to have appeared out of thin air. All we know is that half a year ago he was active in the Ash-Grey Cloud Evil Land and killed a lot of people."
Oh.
Yong Wei raised his brow, "So, he's from the Evil Land." "Unlikely. In the Ash-Grey Cloud Evil Land, there is no such person under the command of the 6 great evil kings." Liu Qingyaro shook his head. The old demon had displayed shocking strength 2 months ago, so Liu Qingyaro was naturally more concerned about him. Even after using the Liu family's strength to inquire about him for a long time, he still couldn't find any clues. But it seems that he is very respectful to ninth brother. Why is such a strong person so docile in front of ninth brother? Yong Wei gently sighed, still puzzled. These were masters who were only 1 step away from the above immortal ascension boundary. Even the central capital's 8 great families didn't have many such masters. These people, even if their status wasn't as high as those at the above immortal ascension boundary, weren't far behind. Once they broke through, they would receive the respect and admiration of the masses. Not to mention him, your ninth brother is also not a fish in a pond. Liu Qingyaro's expression became dignified as he stared off into the distance, fixing his eyes on Yang Kai. Yong Wei glanced over at him and suddenly smiled. "I didn't expect young Lord Liu to praise someone so highly. If ninth brother knew, he would definitely be proud." Liu Qingyao shook his head. I'm not qualified to evaluate him. His future achievements will be higher than mine. He's higher than you now. Yang Wei smiled meaningfully. Yang Kai's vitality was now extremely vigorous. Although he was only at the Yuan Qi boundary 9th stage, even from such a distance, Yang Kai could still feel a huge amount of pressure coming from Yang Kai. He estimated that if he were to fight with Yang Kai now, he would be defeated in less than 10 breaths. Even if Liu Qingyao was stronger than him, he was definitely not his 9th brother's opponent. Since Yang Wei could see this, Liu Qingyao naturally could as well, but he didn't refute Yang Wei's words and instead nodded. It's just that if he continues like this, he will sooner or later fall into the demon Dao. When that time comes, no matter how strong he is or how good his aptitude is, it will be useless. The Yuan Qi in his body is filled with too much malevolent evil Qi, something he won't be able to suppress. Hearing this, Yang Wei couldn't help wearing a bitter expression, knowing that Liu Qingyao wasn't exaggerating, but in his heart he couldn't help wondering how Yang Kai had become like this. Could it be that 9th brother has been cultivating some kind of demonic secret art these past 2 months? Yang Wei secretly guessed. Chapter 519. More and more people rushed out of Yang Kai's house to confront him, but when they saw the old demon guarding Yang Kai, their faces filled with horror and none of them dared to act rashly. The old demon's bloody and cruel methods that night had given them too much of a deterrent. Not long after the old demon arrived, Qiu Yimeng also appeared beside Yang Kai with a group of people. When she saw Yang Kai's current state, the Qiu family's first young lady couldn't help being startled and quickly rushed over to ask, Yang Kai, what happened to you? Huoxing's eyes also trembled as he felt the demonic qi emanating from Yang Kai's body, causing his heart to go cold. The crowd was also pointing at Yang Kai and whispering, discussing whether the youngest young lord of the Yang family was really on the verge of becoming the demon race and was about to lose his mind and be driven by evil. If this was the case, it would be a big joke. The central capital's 8 great families and the ash-grey cloud evil land had always been like fire and water, and the cultivator of the 8 great families had always been responsible for eradicating the demon race. The Yang family's rising star, who was expected to win the right to inherit the patriarch's position, was actually about to become an evil demon. If this news spread, it would only become the talk of the world. Tang Yuxian, the Hu sisters, Dong Qinghan, the 4 girls from 10,000 Flower Palace, Luo Xiaoman, all of them looked over with concern, their faces filled with worry. Are you still sober? Qiu Yimeng asked in a trembling voice, her pair of beautiful eyes staring straight into Yang Kai's eyes, trying to find a trace of humanity in them. Unfortunately, she was disappointed. Yang Kai's eyes, although clear at the moment, were filled with murderous intent, as if he had been affected by hatred and murderous intent, obliterating his true nature. Qiu Yimeng couldn't help trembling as she felt somewhat at a loss. Although her performance in the inheritance war was excellent and she had been acting as Yang Kai's deputy, directing the actions of the many cultivator in the house, in the end, she still regarded Yang Kai as her backbone and all her actions and commands revolved around him. If Yang Kai had an accident, all her efforts would have been in vain. Yang Kai turned his head to look at her and shook his head, it's okay. Qiu Yimeng was stunned, seemingly unable to believe that Yang Kai was able to suppress the demonic qi in this state and maintain a clear mind. If it was any other martial artist, they probably wouldn't be able to do it, right? Old Demon curled his lips and grinned, young master, your current aura is very much to old servant's liking. Ha 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 ha, us master and servant really do share some kind of fate. Qiu Yimeng couldn't help glancing at Yang Kai. Yang, since you're back, why did you come here? To kill. Kill who? Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng. Hearing to Yang Kai's family Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng, although their status wasn't comparable to the young lords and young ladies of the central capital's 8 great families, they were still the future successors of first-class families. Such people couldn't be killed just because Yang Kai said so. Even a hateful person like Lu Song, Yang Kai didn't intend to take his life, so why would he want to kill Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng at this time? Qiu Yimeng, who had just calmed down, couldn't help thinking that Yang Kai had gone crazy. Yang Kai, can we go back first? Chiu Yimeng stepped forward and grabbed Yang Kai's arm, pleading softly, "Let's go back and discuss this matter. We need to see if there is a suitable method to kill Nan Sheng and Xiong Chu without too much effort." Yang Kai turned his head and looked at her strangely. "I'm serious, even if you block the way, there's no way to kill them. Yang Jiao has a lot of cultivators, even if we all rush in, we may not be able to kill them." Chiu Yimeng continued, "Let's go back first, okay?" Hu Star's eyes couldn't help bulging. He had never seen such a gentle side of Chiu Yimeng before. The Chiu family's first young lady had always been intelligent and far-sighted, giving people a sense of shrewdness and ability, making everyone overlook her feminine side. Once such a woman became gentle, she was a fatal temptation to any man, an irresistible temptation. Hu Stars thought that if he were treated so gently by Chiu Yimeng, his bones would melt and he would become completely obedient to her. "Yes, Yang Kai, let's go back first. We'll accompany you to discuss this matter for a few days and nights." Luo Xiaoman didn't know where her courage came from, but she actually dared to speak to Yang Kai. The 4 10,000 Flower Palace girls all nodded in agreement, each of them trying to persuade Yang Kai one by one. Although their words were different, without exception, all of them were extremely gentle, their faces filled with the radiance of motherly love. The rest of the crowd couldn't help looking at each other strangely. Yang Kai frowned, sweeping his eyes over the crowd, his eyes finally landing on Chiu Yimeng's face. "Do you all treat me like a child?" However, even though he said this, Yang Kai still felt a burst of warmth in his heart. No matter what, these people were concerned about his condition. All the women present blushed, only now realizing that his mind was really clear and there were no signs of confusion. Yang Kai chuckled lightly, a trace of gratitude and tenderness appearing on his face as he said lightly, "I'm really fine, you don't need to worry." Chiu Yimeng took a deep breath, her expression becoming solemn. "Good, I believe you're really fine, but you said you want to kill Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng, how are you going to do that? This is Yang Zhao's house, there are nearly 1,000 cultivators here, 4 or 5 times our number. Even if you can kill them, most of the people here will die with them. Do you really have the heart to do that? You think too highly of them." Yang Kai's expression became cold as he slowly shook his head. "Numbers don't mean everything. Second brother is a cautious person, without absolute certainty, it's absolutely impossible for him to fight with me. He has scruples about big brother, he wants to win the inheritance war." "Heh, I don't care." Yang Kai sneered. Chiu Yimeng was stunned, she hadn't expected that Yang Kai would not only be fine but also have such a clear mind. One was free to act recklessly while the other was cautious and overcautious. The development of the situation was likely to be exactly as Yang Kai had said. While Chiu Yimeng was in a daze, Yang Zhao had already strode out of the house, his face gloomy, and under the protection of the numerous cultivators, he coldly shouted, "Ninth brother, what is the meaning of this?" Yang Zhao was also furious. The failure of Xiong Chu, Nan Sheng, and the others had greatly disappointed him. Although he was secretly surprised by Yang Kai's strength, being blocked outside his house like this made Yang Zhao feel like his face had been damaged. It was still daytime, and although dark clouds had gathered in the sky, making it impossible to see the sun, his ninth brother acting like this was clearly not putting him in his eyes. "Second brother," Yang Kai nodded lightly to him. "Second brother's methods are quite good. This time, ninth brother almost lost." Yang Zhao's expression became bitter as he coldly snorted, "No need to ridicule second brother, it was I who underestimated your strength. This time, if I had gone out personally, you wouldn't be standing here talking to me right now." Yang Kai smiled contemptuously, "Even if second brother had gone out personally, I'm afraid he wouldn't have succeeded." Yang Zhao's expression suddenly became cold as he said in a low voice, "Ninth brother, second brother now realizes that you are the most arrogant person in the Yang family." Pausing for a moment, Yang Zhao slowly shook his head, "Ninth brother, for a single high heaven pavilion disciple, is it really worth it? I've heard what happened, and indeed, since you had an agreement with Kang Zhon, the Xiong and Nan families still dared to make a move against them, that's their fault. Their deaths aren't worth regretting, but you've already killed so many people, your anger should have subsided by now. You bringing people to block second brother's door, don't you think that's a bit inappropriate? Or, Do you think second brother is easy to bully? At the end of his words, Yang Zhao's tone became stern. As he questioned, the other cultivators around him all began to secretly condense their true qi, causing the scene to suddenly become tense. Yang Kai's expression remained calm as he coldly said, "Second brother, this time I don't want to argue with you, I just want to kill people. Once I kill those 2 people, I'll leave immediately. With me here, can you kill them? Then there's nothing to say." Yang Kai's face filled with disappointment as he slowly shook his head, his eyes sweeping past Yang Zhao and landing somewhere behind him. At some point, Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng had sneaked out and were currently hiding in the crowd, observing the situation from afar. Perceiving Yang Kai's gaze on them, the 2 of them couldn't help going pale. "Today, no matter who is protecting you, you'll all die." Yang Kai suddenly showed an impatient look as he coldly shouted, a cold light flashing across his eyes. Catcher. Suddenly, the ground began to freeze and an incomparably cold aura descended. With Yang Kai as the center, the fan-shaped territory in front of him was instantly frozen solid. Feeling the danger and murderous intent contained within this cold aura, the cultivators gathered around Yang Zhao's mansion all paled and quickly flew up into the air to avoid the encroaching cold. Unlike the true Yang Yuan Qi cultivated by Yang Kai's true Yang secret art, the energy contained within the unyielding golden skeleton was both evil and cold, the polar opposite of the true Yang Yuan Qi. As soon as Yang Kai used this evil energy, the surrounding temperature suddenly plummeted. The old demon let out a strange laugh as he stretched out his hand and sent out a blood-red light. The frozen earth was suddenly covered in a crimson light, and within this crimson light, a figure strangely appeared. This was the blood demon puppet refined by the old demon. As long as this sea of blood existed, it was immortal. The blood demon stood quietly above the sea of blood, not making the slightest movement, only a monstrous evil aura pulsing from its body. At the same time, Tang Yuxian also let out a shout as she released her powerful spiritual energy. The cultivators around Yang Kai no longer hesitated and summoned their artifacts. Roar. A loud roar rang out as a huge triangular head suddenly appeared behind Yang Kai. This was a head made of pure black energy. This triangular head swayed back and forth as its 2 copper bell-sized slender eyes exuded a terrifying chill. Being stared at by this pair of eyes, no one dared to act rashly. Gradually, this head finally revealed its full ferocious appearance, causing cries of alarm to ring out. This head was actually a jet black flood dragon. Its several dozen-meter-long body hovered above Yang Kai's head, as lifelike as a real creature. When Xiong Chu and Nan Sheng saw this black flood dragon they had not seen in a long time, their legs couldn't help going soft and they almost fell to the ground. At the foot of Taifang Mountain, Yang Kai had relied on this black flood dragon condensed from Yuan Qi to bite off the body of an immortal ascension boundary cultivator. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.